if that ever gets made into a film, I will probably have to go into hiding at some point. It will be Salman Rushdie, won't it? It'll be like that. I'm up for that.
Yeah. No, it's
not
good
not
stuff.
the getting knifed part. I'll leave that to him.
That,
but
yeah,
rather avoid that whole part of it. But
yeah,
I still can't believe that happened. I mean,
it's wild.
The
thing I do find kind of strange about that whole thing is what there is part of me that like generically, right? Someone writes something that pisses someone else so much that they try and kill them. Yeah, all right. I guess in the abstract, I can see. But it's the fact that Rushdie in particular was such a, is clearly still such a lightning rod is what I kind of find. It's the bit that I find curious is like, why him particularly? Do you know what I mean? Like, why?
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It
is fascinating. I mean,
he's not the only person to have written, things about Islam that other people might consider to be blasphemous or derogatory or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not.
But he has become almost like the hereditary bogeyman, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Certainly in the UK, it seems, and the US.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a very good documentary on the BBC, actually, on the back of that entire thing. A young guy who's a BBC broadcaster who happens to be both gay and Muslim, which is really interesting.
Right.
And he sort of explored his own relationship with both his religion, his sexuality, and the book, and the satanic verses.
Right.
And he actually went back to places like Bradford. He went to places where there is a very quite strong Muslim community.
Right.
And his conclusion was kind of sad, to be honest. He spoke to some of the people who were involved in the initial protests and whatnot, who initially tried to get the satanic verses banned and whatnot. And his conclusion was really kind of sad. He said from within, because he is part of that community, he was saying that from within that community, we are not mature enough at the moment to have this conversation. Ideologically, we are not mature enough. We haven't had certain cultural revolutions yet that will allow us to have this conversation as adults, unfortunately. There was even a point in the documentary where someone ran up to him and nicked his copy of the verses out of his hand. And it was kind of like, wow, this is, and it's such a difficult thing because, of course, I mean, I will always be on the side of the author in this instance, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Like always. If you don't like it, don't fucking read it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the bottom line. Yeah. And authors can write about what they like. Yep. I'm really sorry. They can write about what they like, and they can certainly write about a religion that definitely has an opinion about them.
Right. Absolutely.
You know what I mean? What I mean? If you want to talk about things that are sacred, that are offensive, well, I'm really sorry. There's a real problem with gay Muslims being excommunicated, even assaulted within their own communities, and that's offensive.
Yeah, right.
That's really offensive, and it's a discussion that has to be had.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult one because, of course, I mean, the problem that we have on the left often with this is that we are unwilling to discuss the problems that exist within like Islamic communities because we're afraid of being lumped in with the racists and the Islamophobes and whatnot, and that does leave us in a slightly toothless position in many respects, and that is a problem, but it's something we need to consider as well. It is possible to have both conversations.
I think that's true. I think also like part of what I'm coming to realize, like the more I look at kind of intersectionality and the way it works, is like one of the ways that we can be useful in that conversation is by elevating the voices of the marginalized within that community. Do you know what I mean? Like that's kind of and building bridges and always like building bridges with the progressives in any community, right? Because I mean, you and I have talked about this before about one of the things that ended up inoculating me against the kind of the virus of new atheism that inevitably sort of became the kind of alt-right thing was when you get involved with any kind of leftist movement of any size, whether it's trade unionism, whether it's the peace movement, whether it's or even just like leftist charitable work, like food banks, distribution, whatever, right? It doesn't take long before you come into contact of people of faith, and you suddenly realize, like, okay, it's not about what you believe per se. It's far more complicated than that. Do you know what I mean?
It is very complex. I mean, the whole thing with the satanic verses, that is so complicated. It's about like it's about the place and the position of not just Muslims, but like people of immigrant populations and the children of immigrants in this culture. And it's a huge, massive, complex, roiling pot of it's so difficult to get a bead on what informed that entire. And of course, I mean, the other thing this guy did, which I thought was brilliant, he tracked down some of the what would have been the National Front back then, who were and he interviewed them. They're not National Front anymore, and he said they were saying like, "Oh, to us, this was fantastic." The way the Muslim community, certain areas of the Muslim community were acting in response to this, gave us so much
propaganda material. Yeah, and they could paint the whole community over that.
Well, this is it, right? Yeah. They had the stereotype of the angry, shouting, like, immigrant person, right? They had that like right front and center in the news all the time. So they got massive recruitment on the back of that. The guy he interviewed said, "Oh, we didn't give a fuck. We didn't even know, we didn't know anything about Islam. We didn't know anything about the satanic verses itself because we never read it because we didn't read books, obviously." Anti-intellectualism is a huge thing in the National Front. He said, "We didn't know a fucking thing." But what we did know was that this furor had given us so much recruitment material and allowed us to take to the stage in a way that otherwise we'd have just been like condemned as the racists we were, So you've got extremism on one side fueling the extremism on the other, and ultimately you just have this hideous clash of two extremes, that both of which are powerfully illegitimate, illegitimate in their own ways.
I'm kind of against the forces of reactionary far right conservatism wherever it rears its ugly head. Basically, whether it's the far right nationalists of the what used to be the BNP and is now, used to be the EDL. Christ knows what they're calling themselves. Which
I have no idea.
Sets of letters there.
They're constantly relabeling, aren't they? Because they love to distance themselves from whatever
they were 5 minutes ago. Yeah.
Whatever the hell they are now.
Britain first or keep Britain English or whatever the fuck. But I mean, but then on the, but equally that applies to any kind of, far right religious grouping, whether it's Christian, whether it's Muslim, whether it's Jewish, whether it's whatever. Like,
absolutely.
And I'm not against them because of their religion, because I've worked with their fellow religionists in lefty causes for decades. Like, that's not what it's about at all. It's the forces of reaction. It's the forces of illiberalism. And I'm always going to be against that. Yeah.
This once again, you talked about what turned you away from the new atheism thing, and that was what got me. It was when they started saying that things like, the liberal Christians and the liberal Muslims are just as much to blame as the extremists, and I'm like, no, I'm sorry.
Oh my God, no, that was
they are not.
Dawkins said they were worse because they
did. He said they give them cover.
Yeah, and they gave cover to it, and it's like, that's really not what happens.
But that's not what happens, and you're alienating potential allies here.
Well, not if you're Richard Dawkins, because he is a fucking reactionary. That's the point. Yeah, right? Like, he doesn't understand.
That's true.
He doesn't understand the fight he's in,
But yeah, we have it's now, fortunately, it seems to generally have become the case that a lot of people have moved away from that very particular kind of very reactionary atheist movement and have become much more considered in it, Well, it does still exist, but
the ones that didn't ride the train to alt-right town, right? That's the thing, right? The movement. The reason no one calls themselves a new atheist anymore is anyone that still believes in that shit is now alt-right. and anyone who doesn't is on the
Well, they
left doing
reveal
something meaningful. You know.
ultimately beneath their bullshit, beneath their veneer of liberalism, they hate Muslims. You know, they actually
Yeah,
do
yeah.
have this genuine Islamophobia. The way they focus intently on, you know, it really is the case for very, very many of them. There's a lot of the key figures
I mean,
in that
Sam
movie.
Harris is always the one I think about for that. You
Right,
know,
Sam
it's just like,
Harris. There was a guy here on YouTube, Thunderfoot. You know,
mhm.
there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them, unfortunately, and ultimately they got stuck in they got stuck in a grift in the same way a lot of figures in the present day on the alt right or far right have. You know, they rely
Mhm.
on it now. They rely on the grift for everything. They're kind of like the Lawrence Foxes or
Yeah.
the you know of that movement. They relied on it so much that it's become their bread and butter now. They don't actually have a choice, you know, and that's really sad. That it's that cynical a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean, they, you know, I always think about people like, you know, Sargon of Akkad, like they back themselves into
Mm,
these intellectual cul-de-sacs, right? And then it's
yeah.
like, but they've got no choice because all of their, especially if you know, because in a lot of the cases, I mean, he's a good example. Like, I mean, that is a man that is, you know, just unemployable.
Unemployable, right? There's
Like
no,
no
yeah,
one, like so the only way he can maintain any kind of lifestyle is by continuing. He's got to stay with the grift. He's got to keep
yeah.
pushing it.
I
And
mean, a more recent example we saw is Russell Brand, right?
oh god,
You know, I mean, you know, he is like he is one of those people where yeah, I was never taken in by the grift. I remember
sure.
seeing it the first time way back when I was only a kid, really. I was like a teenager, and
Mm,
his bullshit, the
yeah,
veneer of faux intellectualism. I remember saying to my mum, like, this guy's a fucking idiot.
yeah, yeah.
I remember trying to talk to her about what he was doing because I understood back then, you know, I understood what he was doing. The reason he's using all of this flowery language and all of this faux Dickensian bullshit, and the reason he's got like the look that he has and the pantomimic quality that he has, it's a grift, it's a scam, it's flim flam. It's the
Mm.
magician say, you know, sort of, it's misdirection. Look over here, look over here. Don't listen to the content of what I'm saying. Just listen to the sound of it, listen to the words, right? That's it. That's all it is. The whole thing has always been flim flam, and that's what his whole career has been from beginning to end. And the fact that he's moved from like one position to the next whenever it's convenient for him personally doesn't surprise me at all. Like
No.
at all.
But
And now,
he was always going to land on the far right because it was
yeah,
always going to be where the money was. Like the left is,
absolutely.
you know, the reason you don't get a lot of lefty grifters is because there aren't a lot of multinational, multi-million lefty companies. Like they don't really
Left
exist.
tends to eat them, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Ultimately, the
exactly.
left tends to eat them. Like one of the big. I mean, don't get me wrong. This does occur on the left, and it is a real problem. But it's nowhere near as endemic as it is on the right, where it doesn't matter what they say, as long as they're towing the right line. Then the right will flock to them. As long as they are, you know, making the right dog whistles, making the right appreciations. As long as they're giving that dopamine hit out. Oh, that feels right. That feels correct. Therefore, it is correct. It's making me feel justified and good. That's all that matters.
Hmm.
That's all that matters. Ultimately, you know, the people who are so constantly, oh, fuck your feelings. Oh, facts don't care about your feelings. There is no one more intent on reinforcing their own feelings and who takes their own feelings as measure of absolute truth than those on the right. There
Yeah,
is no one ideologically on this earth. They interpret the feeling of something feeling correct to them that reinforces their ego in a narcissistic sense as being evidence of truth.
yeah,
They
pretty much.
conflate those things. They conflate those things together. And they don't have, for the most part, they don't have the instruments or the ability to question that. Why do I feel that's correct? Why does it feel good when that person
Hmm.
says that? And is it just because it feels good in my breast, because it stirs this sort of feeling in my breast, does that mean that it is good and correct? Hmm. You know, you've got to be really careful. I mean, yeah, you know, ideologically, you have to be really careful because a lot of what is false sounds good and correct. You know, I mean, one of the things that I don't know whether it was Dawkins or one of the others, but one of the things they did say about they used evolution as an example, and they were absolutely correct about this. Evolution is counterintuitive as an idea.
Right.
It's totally counterintuitive. It makes absolute no sense whatsoever on an intuitive level. If you look at life forms on this planet with no wider knowledge or information, it's clear they were put together, right?
Well, I mean, I
They
think,
function
yeah,
like machines, you know,
but
they
also,
function like machines. So I understand why people without that wider knowledge or without that ability to question further or to understand wider contexts, why they would interpret it that way.
I mean, there's that. There's also, particularly with evolution, although this applies to other matters as well, actually. In fact, in terms, I would say it's really relevant for economics as well, particularly relevant for economics. Our minds are not equipped to deal with the scales involved.
Exactly, right.
In evolution. That's why it can't, because it's like you have to get your head around over hundreds of millions of years this process of selection occurs, and no one can really get their heads around 100 million years. So instead what you end up with, like, well, I don't understand, we don't see monkeys giving birth to humans, right? And because
they don't get it, right?
Because it doesn't make intuitive. Yeah, you can't if you haven't. Yeah, exactly.
Billions of years. We're talking cosmic time, right?
Right. And we're not built for that. You know, our heads aren't built for that. It's the same. I still, honestly, I think it's the same thing that I think most people don't have the first clue of what it means to be a billionaire.
No,
I don't think most people have any clue of how much wealth a billion is, right? They just think like, oh, it's just a few. I mean, millionaires you can get.
Right. They could comprehend it. They would riot immediately. Well, they would riot immediately. If they could, I mean, there are a few examples floating around the internet which are really good, which do give you an example of what it's like. Like, you know, the one that if you started earning money in the time of Columbus, and every day from that point you were earning $5,000, up until now, you would still be nowhere near. You're still nowhere near a billionaire.
Sure, and I mean, but the trouble, I think they're nice attempts, but I think the problem is that you run into is it's the same thing that I mean, like I remember science classes was like, here's a golf ball, that's planet Earth. See the multi-story car park across the road, that's the sun. Okay, yeah. I get that there's a difference in scale, but you know what I mean? Like it's still abstracted because our brains just aren't built to do it. Yeah. They're not built to comprehend it, you know?
No. It's difficult, isn't it? If you could sort of see it, if you could give you like the mountain of money, the mountain of gold or whatever.
But the other thing is, when you do get people close to it, if you find a good metaphor that cuts through, it's amazing. Often people just think, "Oh, that can't be right." Because then this kind of morality thing kicks in, and like, well, no one, surely no one would ever. Like, why would you need like?
Right.
You know, and that's it. It's like, yeah, you see people like just instinctively shy away from the insanity of the reality of our system. Like
insanity of it, right? Yeah. Like because it baffles the mind of sane people, doesn't it? Of like certainly morally sane people, it baffles them. Why would you can't do anything with that amount of money?
Right.
It's literally impossible to do anything with it within a human lifetime as it currently stands.
Yeah, so, it kind of doesn't matter what your ambition is. Like, do you know what I mean? That's the thing. Right. It's like I don't know. It's
amazing to actually look at prominent examples of billionaires from around the world, isn't it? Because they're all loonies.
Oh yeah,
they are crazy people, and that includes the ones who were born. I mean, the ones who were born billionaires may as well be like Nibiru, like David Icke, reptilian people. They may as well be. You know, the metaphor it may be true. It may as well be true. But even the ones who like became billionaires, it does something to people, doesn't it?
Oh, completely. I mean, it's you know, the TV show, or what was it called, Succession. I mean, I think one of the genuinely brilliant things about Succession was I mean, I remembered like I had to take 2 goes at it because after the end of the first episode, I just hate all these people. I hate them.
Yes.
Why would I watch a show? Right. I hate every single one of them. And someone kind of explained to me, no, that's the point. Keep going. And I was like, all right.
Yeah.
And it is. There's a point where you realise like the kind of the central message of the show, and one of the central messages of the show. Anyway, it's like not only does money, not that level of wealth, not make you happy, it makes you fucking miserable and inhuman. It dehumanizes you as surely as you dehumanize others because they don't have the same level of wealth.
Right.
And it just, they're just, you know, you watch them and they're entirely kind of governed by, you know, like all of their basest whims, instincts, fears, neurosis. None of them are happy. None of
No,
them are, none of them are, within a million miles of like emotionally stable or fulfilled, or they wouldn't even know what happiness was. I don't think. And it's like,
no,
look,
I don't think so.
I'm not saying boo-hoo the fucking billionaires, by the way, just to be
No,
clear about this. Like, because
absolutely not.
sympathy with the victims first, last, always, right? Like, it's fuck
Yeah,
them in the ear. They should know better. But
yeah.
it's just interesting to know, like, to see that and just be like, oh yeah, right. And of course, as soon as you do that, you start looking at the real life ones, right? You look at the Murdochs, so you look at the, the Musks, or the, and you just think like, yeah, you guys are really fucked in the head. Like, all of you, you're all completely fucking mental.
You are such problematic human beings. I mean, what I get,
Yeah.
particularly when, I mean, Elon Musk is like the de jure example at the moment, isn't he? He is just this vacuum of identity. And that's what when you look at his career, I suppose you could call it, his stumbling, weird lurch through life, it's always been this search for identity, like or to rather, it's this very narcissistic expression of identity that doesn't exist. Oh, I'm this, I'm this tech bro, like futurist genius. And it's like, no, you're a billionaire brat who's never had to strive for anything, and therefore hasn't had the tensions that create personality, that cultivate personality and identity. And what you're doing is using your money as a substitute.
Yeah.
You've got a good PR team around you, because of course you fucking do. You can pay anyone to do this, right? And that's what you've coasted on, this PR identity, which is entirely flim-flam. Underneath, you are a vacuum. You're an empty plastic bag of a human being. There's nothing there.
I mean, I'm still astonished to this day that, I mean, he basically, and this is before he took over Twitter even, but he basically he all but admitted that he was lurching not just to the right, but to the far right, because the media were about to break a story about a child that he'd had while he was in another relationship. Like, he admitted it. He actually said, I mean, his couching for it was, oh, look, man, you can't trust the media because they're about to do a blah, 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 blah. But it's like, no, dude, you're quite happy to burn down democracy and back the fascist candidate for presidency of the United States because the media said mean things about you.
Exactly that. And they always, I mean,
true things, by the way, just to be clear. Like,
yes, by the way, true things.
And what I don't understand, I mean, I know a lot of them are bots, right? I know a lot of them are bots, but I don't understand the army of sycophants that then appears immediately behind him going, oh, Mr. Musk is so wonderful, what an incredible, what a genius.
It's hilarious. These are, I mean, these people who, they are like, I mean, they're like those parasitic little fish, aren't they, that swim alongside like one of the bigger fish, even though the bigger fish isn't that really impressive, to be honest, and wouldn't notice them at all. It's so bizarre. It's such a bizarre thing. I don't know whether they feel as though there's something very servile about it. Like, the psychology of it is servile. It's like people in this country who worship the royal family or whatever. It's like, can't you see that you are serf-minded, that you are elevating someone based on nothing, like literally nothing. I understand appreciating people who have done something impressive.
Sure.
I totally get that. Even then, I'm very, very wary of sort of hero worshipping them. But this is insanity. This is a kind of cultural insanity. This is. And it's historically based. Certainly here in the UK, it is historically based. It's this sort of like almost a medieval serfs and nobles thing going on, right? Playing out in a postmodern setting.
Yeah, and I think, but it's back to what you were saying earlier. Like, they feel it, so it must be true because they feel it so strongly, and therefore,
right? It must be true. Anything that is contrary to that is a conspiracy, or it's a lie, or it's this, or it's that, because it attacks the ego, right? It attacks the identity that they've invested in these people, or in their weird parasocial relationship to the media-fueled idea of these people. I mean, it was, for me, it was what really woke me up to it was like the Diana situation that occurred, right? I mean, I was 14 when that happened, and I remember getting up that morning and this ages it, by the way. Yeah, we're old, by the way, guys. I remember turning on CFAX on my television and seeing like the thing flash up. It was the page refresh, and it said Princess Diana killed in road accident, and I was like, oh right, well, that's interesting. And when I went downstairs to an insane world.
Yeah.
to a world I wasn't part of, where there was this, what I can only call media-fueled mass hysteria happening across the country. Every news broadcast, every TV station, every bloody thing. And it went on for a long time, longer than most people remember. There was shit like
God, it went on forever.
Princess Diana memorial plates and figurines and jewelry. And I'm like, fuck, do people not understand this is obscene? This is bizarre.
Like, I was living in Barnstable in North Devon at the time. I was pretending to go to college, and I remember some of the thing that really got me was like, I mean, I kind of got people of like the next generation, like get like whatever, but it was I vividly remember a conversation with a friend of mine who I know damn well was never any kind of royalist, and I remember him talking about how he'd gone down to the local, what the fuck was it, shopping centre, I think, to sign one of the million books of condolences, right? And I was like, so already I'm like, I mean, I didn't ask, but I'm like, because the way he was, that was the thing, the way he was talking about it, it was like, obviously, just because everyone's doing that, right? Of course, like, so I didn't even feel there was really an opportunity to be like, so you did that, why?
Why? Yeah.
But this is what I remember too. Listen, the crazy part is I remember him doing that, and he told me he'd done it, and then he said he'd gone with this other guy, and the other guy had really pissed him off because he'd written this really long poem in the fucking condolence book, and that was really crass. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, you're all fucking mad. What is going on right now? What is going on? Like,
yeah. This is insanity. This is cultural insanity. I remember having that revelation. I am existing right now in a moment of cultural hysteria, and it's really isolating. It's really strange. It makes you feel bad because you're the bit of grit, right? You're the cynic. You're the one who's puncturing everyone's bloody delusions. And it's like, to me, it said something. I remember talking to a friend of mine because we were like this at school. I remember saying to him, like, everybody's so sad. And I didn't mean about the death of Diana. I mean, like, about themselves. That's what this is. Everyone, people can't relate to one another. Everyone is so alone and isolated and sad in this country. That's why they're having this mass expression for someone they don't fucking know, but they think they do. They've been told that they do, It's, I'd have been happier if I'd woken up to like a countrywide orgy or something, some weird sexual revolution. That would have made sense to me. But this
that was weird.
I don't understand, and I've never understood. I don't get it. He's missing
as well. Like, it's the thing about, like, I mean, this is the thing. Like, I say I don't understand. Actually, I do. Like, if I think about it, I get it, because you do as well. You just described it, actually, right? You do understand.
I'm being facetious.
But this is an important point. What I mean is, the reason I bring that up, I'm not saying that to kind of correct you on what you're saying, but what I mean is that because you were using, I don't understand in a colloquial way, and so was I. That's fine. But what I mean is that I actually think the barrier is that the people on the other side of that equation really don't understand people like us, and that's the thing for me. It's like, for me, where I can handle people who disagree with me on all kinds of things. What I can't handle are people who are offended by the very notion that someone would disagree with them on something they consider to be a core belief, right? People who don't have the necessary empathetic and emotional and imaginative equipment to be able to understand that there are other points of view in the world than theirs.
That's right. And also, you cannot feel what you don't feel.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
They want to play, don't they? They want to play, because if you don't conform, then you are holding up the mirror to the delusion. If you don't conform, you are daring to suggest that there is actually an alternative way of behaving here. And you said they don't understand. Part of me feels that there must be part of them that does. Subconsciously, somewhere, there must be part of them that understands this is not sincere. I am not actually feeling this. I am performing this.
I mean, maybe, but to go back to the Muskheads, I mean, a part of the reason they get so upset whenever anyone dares to challenge or upset, or poke fun at their beloved demigod, I think the response you'll see so often is, "Oh, that's just jealousy. That's just jealousy."
That's just jealousy. It's like I would, I would boil my own eyes and eat them rather than be Elon Musk with all of his wealth.
Do you know what I
because
mean?
he is fundamentally an awful. Not only is he awful, but he's empty. It must be like a hollowed out wasp's nest in his head. I would, I cannot even begin to understand that level of internal hell. I can't even begin to understand what it must be to be that unhappy with who and what you are. To understand on some level that being born to your status of privilege has destroyed you and there's no coming back. There's no redemption there.
Yeah, and I think for me it's that thing of like when they say it's just jealousy. The reason they're saying that is because for some of them, I think they genuinely are unable to comprehend that someone might sincerely feel the way you do.
Yeah,
like they can't
absolutely.
get that they can't get their head around. That's like no. That's just, he says all that, but what he means is I'll never be able to do that because I'm not that clever, right? That's what they have to do, that because they have to. They've got to grasp on with both hands to that fucking. But this is the thing, right? It's the difference between lowercase t truths and capital letters truth, right? Yeah. And the fact they think like they've got a truth there, we're back to capitalism as a religion, right? Like, and I don't mind people who are religious, but fundamentalists of whatever stripe bother me, and capitalist fundamentalists are really, really, really scary people.
Well, they're the ones that are really destroying the world at the moment, aren't they? And have been for quite a while. So,
and and they also make up a good portion of the 25% of any democratic body that will happily vote fascist.
Yeah, it's true.
There's no Venn diagram there. It's a fucking circle.
It's a circle. It's a circle. I mean, you always see it when that particular kind of sort of self-justification you see whenever Ayn Rand comes up, because I'm really sorry, but anyone who's ever read any other philosopher, any other philosophical text, you cannot be an objectivist. It's the stupidest thing on earth. It really is. It just doesn't hold water. It doesn't hold water. It's internally inconsistent, for one thing. And the fact that Ayn Rand herself became everything that objectivism hates at the end of her life, right? Yeah. The way they try to tie themselves into knots justifying that, or break it, or just stopping the conversation. Because that's all you really need. That's all you really need. All you need to say is she was by the end of her life, she was a drug addict on benefits. Now, in and of itself, no, that's misfortune. And that is not something to condemn someone for. But the fact that these are situations that she described as weak, that she proclaimed should be just left to die, literally, in her work, it's like, well, there's a problem there, isn't there? There's an inconsistency here, and you see it all the time with these sort of these right-wing ideologues. You see it all the time. I mean, Jordan Peterson, clean room, mate, look, sort yourself out.
I don't condemn like 99.99% of Americans who got caught up in the the OxyContin scandal, and as a result ended up getting hooked on an opioid that their doctors insisted was safe, right? And nothing but sympathy for 99.99% of them. But when one of them is called Rush Limbaugh, and he spent the entire time on the radio describing drug addicts as weak people, as people who deserve either life jail sentences or the death penalty, which are things that he said on his radio show for years and years and years and years, whilst being privately addicted to what was at that point the street name for was hillbilly heroin, which he was buying. You couldn't make this shit up off his fucking cleaner.
I know. You can't make it up, can you?
And it's like, I'm sorry, no, that guy in particular, fuck that guy.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's not saying anything about the wider issue, anything about addiction in general as being a disease rather than but that guy who used his massive platform to demonize addicts for fucking years whilst being one himself, fuck that guy.
Absolutely. I mean, it works in sort of like more ideological ways as well. I mean, one of the most vitriolic condemners of drug addicts in this country in the public sphere is Peter Hitchens, obviously. And I've always found that fucking hilarious because he's a pusher. He doesn't realize it, but he's a fucking pusher. He writes for the Daily Mail. What is the Daily Mail? It is, in and of itself, it is a drug. It is something that caters to a very particular kind of ideological addiction. But I imagine if you could actually like take a neurobiological scan of someone's brain as they're reading the Daily Mail, it would do very similar things to someone who's having a hit. You know?
Yeah.
That's what it does. He's a pusher. He's an ideological pusher. He would not be able to appreciate it because he lacks that level of insight, but he is. And it's like, you are a fucking hypocrite, man.
Yeah.
You are a fucking hypocrite. And part of him must know what he's doing by writing for the Daily Mail. He must know that all he's actually doing is appealing to very base urges and prejudices, which are in and of themselves often very they have a sort of biological element, if not a base. You know, it's that dopamine hit, isn't it? Oh, it feels right, it feels good, it feeds the demon, right? Oh, well, that, you know, they've written about my scapegoat du jour, whether it's the queers or the liberals or the immigrants or whatever. That makes me feel good. That makes me feel justified, and therefore it's good. It's correct. It's the same. It's the same as a chemical In fact, I would argue chemical dependencies are far more honest than this shit. And in their own ways, not as dangerous. In the wider scale, not as dangerous as this bullshit. As we're seeing, right?
Yeah,
Seeing. It's an amazing thing that people can't see this. That people can't understand this poor hypocrisy, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it, you know, as you say, we're back to the thing, like they get the dopamine hit and then they reverse engineer everything in their lives to fit around that hit being a morally good thing, rather than just admit they've got a fucking habit and they've got a fucking problem.
Right. They do have a problem. I would say that those who routinely go and buy the Daily Mail, that's why they do it. It justifies them. And it may not even feel like ostensibly or superficially positive. It may be that they're reading, oh, look, here's all those immigrants again, all those queers again. Actually, when that happens, it may not feel that positive, but it kind of is to them. That's what's happening in their minds. It's releasing something like a chemical that's telling them they're right, they're absolutely correct in their prejudice, and therefore you are justified. It reinforces the ego, it reinforces the sense of self and stability. It's a really dark thing, and it's a kind of dependency, love, you know.
I mean, and you know, people see it all the time, and I mean, many people have experienced it with you know, social media, right? It's the same thing. It's the outrage machine, and then you end up with an algorithm that's primed to kind of drive. And the algorithm doesn't care about anything except that you react. It doesn't care if your reaction is fury or love, right? And because we're quicker to get angry than we are to fall in love, we tend to get more angry stuff because that's what we respond to faster.
Yes,
and so it becomes a kind of vicious cycle, and you're getting fed
very,
more and more.
Careful, right?
Yeah, you're getting fed more and more things that outrage you. But you got to remember that, like, the Daily Mail is like the original algorithm. Like before there was, right? You know, before there was Facebook and Twitter, like pouring the shit into your brain, or YouTube, right, pouring the shit into your brain. The Daily Mail's been very practiced at this. And
I suppose the fundamental difference is the nature of the medium, right? Because the Daily Mail is a newspaper, it's monolithic. There's no one coming in and saying, actually, that's wrong. Actually, this is distorted or whatever. Whereas on social media, you can get that. You can get the sort of correct elements, you know.
That is true, but I think it's very suggestive that the biggest, most popular online quote unquote news site in the world is the Daily Mail online.
Right. Yeah.
So actually, there is something about their particular brand of poison that is incredibly pervasive and is incredibly addictive and reaches across national boundaries. Yeah. Well, I think it's crack cocaine. You know.
To go for the hyper-capitalist drug, yeah.
yeah. I think you know, I think the Telegraph's more like heroin, you know.
Yeah.
Personally.
It's kind of like the sun would be like something really dirty, wouldn't it? It'd be like
it's like ketamine.
Yeah, ket, maybe like crystal or something like that. Really dirty, scum, vile. Yeah, definitely.
Whereas the Stars, like, you know, it's like a line of cocaine, right? Or on a bad day, it's like a line of amphetamine, but it's it's still not. Don't get me wrong, it's still not good for you. Like
No,
it really isn't.
It's not.
But,
I mean, the whole thing with the Star is that it's so ridiculous that you can take it, right? Satire, right, as comedy.
Yeah. It does remind me of like, I mean, it doesn't exist anymore, but like the Daily Sport, right, which used to run entirely fictitious. It was like our version of like National Enquirer, except it also ran lots of scantily clad women on like every other page. It was fucking weird, the Daily Sport.
It was a strange publication, but very funny.
Yeah, it was funny, and like the headlines were always like, like Loch Ness Monster is a Nazi U-boat and shit like that, right? Like it was,
There's an episode of Bottom where Eddie's reading it, and it says the headline is Neil Kinnock's grandparents were homosexual Martians. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Right?
Yeah.
Oh my god. Oh dear me. Anywho,
who among us would have thought we'd be harking back and thinking nostalgically about the more innocent age of the Daily fucking Sport? Does that tell you about where we've ended up as a species? That we're sitting there going, oh, do you remember when it was just all like tits and stupid headlines that make no sense?
Well, I tell you what, I've just started my psychology degree, and the reading I do, there's that meme that goes around where it's like it's Kurt Russell from like Big Trouble in Little China when he's all dressed up to go to the bordello,
the brothel,
and then it's Snake Plissken, and it says like before you do your psychology degree, after you do your psychology degree. Yeah, the more you learn about how people work, the more you hate humanity. Apparently, it's actually quite common.
It's funny you say that, because I assumed that the after picture would actually be him as McCready from The Thing, with that whole kind of nobody trusts anybody anymore. We're all very tired.
He's decided to go like as far away from most human beings as it's possible to be.
Yeah, and he's still experiencing a paranoid nightmare.
Honestly, some of the reading I've got, some of the books I've started, they have prefaces where they tell you this.
Yeah,
it's a danger of this kind of academic material. You do learn a lot about how human beings work, and it can make you very, very, very misanthropic and very isolated, and
some of it's quite depressing. Spoilers.
Not really happy to be interacting with human beings when you are sitting there going, you're doing this because of this, and this is what you're doing. Actually, it's like, you're ruining interaction for me. It's not an art form anymore. It's a dissection. Fuck.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never been that big a fan of people, to be honest.
So you'd be okay, yeah.
I think you'll be fine, George.
Again, I'm exaggerating for effect. It's the movement.
Well, I just think you've done I think at this point a reasonable job in your life. You've found your kind of fellow aliens, right? And we'll just hang out together. We'll be okay,
I think we'll be fine. I've cultivated my personal experience of humanity very, very, very carefully. So yes.
Yeah, there you go.
You'll be fine. Speaking of weird humanity.
Yeah, indeed.
Whoa.
And fellow aliens, or I guess in this case, demons.
I don't. You don't hear of this one that often, do you? The skins.
I'd never heard of it before.
Right.
Before reading it today, in fact, for the first.
Wow. Yeah, and having read it again this time, I knew this one had made an impact on me because a lot of the imagery in this one really took me when I was young, when I read it for the first time. The monsters, the weirdly almost like almost pantomimic, almost like a comedy of errors, human characters. Then married to this continuation of the feminism that you get in Jacqueline S, right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
interesting.
That thread I thought was really interesting, and also again I think in the female character in the story you see for me the first seeds of Judith, right?
Absolutely, and a lot of other characters to come.
Absolutely.
Like women protagonists in his work to come. It's interesting because that's true of the whole work. It is like the Skins of the Fathers is like a prototype. It's like an experiment of later work. All of the weird fascinations and obsessions that will come up it's Cabal, right?
Sure. Yeah. In embryonic form.
Cabal. It's in embryonic form. It's got the same dynamic. The way the monsters are presented is celebratory and glorious. The monsters are never the bad guys in this story, ever. They're a carnival at the beginning, right? They are this incredible movement through the desert that could be beautiful. It's beautiful in the way it's presented to the reader, but the way the male characters react to it is always with horror. It's always with disgust, misunderstanding, confusion that then transmutes into violence.
Yeah, and fear, and particularly actually with the first encounter, I think that's really interesting. Fear of sexual violence.
Yes.
You know, I'm really struck by the opening is amazing. By the way, it's another one of the opening paragraph. I think I read the opening paragraph by itself like 4 or 5 times because it just delighted me. You know, it was just one of those things where like that is a perfect paragraph. That is just, you know, people should get that tattooed, especially people who write short stories. Like, you want to know how to set a scene, you want to know how to get a story started, fucking read this. Like, it is so, like, it reminded me of, and not just because of the circumstance, although obviously the circumstance is similar, it reminded me of the opening of Desperation, which I think is, you know, if it's not my favorite King opening, it's certainly like top 3, right? Like, it's right up there. The opening of Desperation, that first chapter of Desperation. But then Barker kind of does it in a paragraph, right? Just like, I know, right? Fucking hell, dude. That is, I mean, you know, I'll be fair, there's slightly less incident in the paragraph than there is in King's first chapter. Okay, fine, I'm exaggerating for effect. But still, like, it's so fucking impressive the way the story sets out the stall. It's so good. And you are there and you are in. Like, let's fucking go. Right. You know?
And that's all the way through, right? This story is so lean. It's for a story that's got so much happening, because there's about 3 separate like narrative threads in this short story, right?
Yeah.
And they are all so lean and they weave together so beautifully. Like, there's the prose just hurtles on. I mean, that's true of a lot of stories in the Books of Blood, but in this one, there's so much going on, like physically happening. All its movement and color all the way through. People are moving, right? All the way through this story. It's incredible. He's absolutely incredible. And in between that, you've got this mythology going on. This really thread of mythology, which is bizarrely feminist. It's like anti-Lovecraftian as well. Like, the monsters in this story are kind of Lovecraftian, but whereas Lovecraft is always about the horror and the grotesquerie and the disturbia, Barker's about the beauty. He's saying, like, these are the really beautiful things. These things have been raked up from the subconscious, and aren't they glorious? Aren't they wonderful? The only one who can appreciate it is the woman, right?
Well, I mean, or as the mythology implies, women in general. And I think that's very interesting. Yeah, that's a very kind of interesting thread, which we'll probably spend more time tugging at as we go through. I mean, the other thing that I think, you know, when you talk about the pace, yes. I mean, I remember when I think you messaged me when you read it this afternoon. You were like, "How has there never been a film of this?" And that is dead on, because for me, the phrase that was ringing in my head like a bell all the way through is cinematic. Now, again, not the first cinematic story in this collection. In fact, I think Barker in Books of Blood is a very cinematic writer in the majority of the stories, not all of them, but I think it's his. If he has a default mode at this point, we're a book and a half in, I would say cinematic is his default. Right, he can do other styles and he does them very effectively, but cinematic is the one he returns to the most. And this one feels, because you're exactly right, and all of what you were saying there about motion, but also this is a story that is full of spectacle. You know, whether it's the descriptions of the creatures themselves, and there's a great moment too when Barker gives a very Lovecraftian description of the creatures as being like, you know, I can't remember the exact thing, but it's like, you know, a product of a nightmare or whatever, something, you know, incomprehensibility of a nightmare, something like that, which is so Lovecraft, right?
Lovecraft.
But you know what's funny is I read it, I had a massive grin on my face, because even before I got there, I knew the next paragraph was going to give me a loving physical description of what he was talking about. Like, he wasn't just going to go, "It's undescribable." He's going to pretend it's undescribable, and then he's going to fucking describe it, because it's
and he does, doesn't he? I mean, like, he really loves it. So, I mean, one of the things he does in this story is something that comes up again and again in Barker's work, where he is so obsessed with an image or with certain images, and he paints them for you, right? He really wants you to have an impression of them. But also, he's really careful about it. The way he describes these creatures would make them very difficult to render in any sort of visual medium because they're so protean, they're so fluid, they're so incomprehensible to what we understand of as anatomy. Even the monsters in other horror fiction would balk at this. They're much more defined than these entities are, right?
Well, yeah, and also I think one of the crucial points about the monsters or demons or whatever they are in this story specifically is that they are not they don't conform to any physical type within themselves.
No.
They are a wild menagerie. They are a plethora of forms, and that kind of notion comes back when you get to the kind of the kind of sex scene later on. She describes different forms, different feelings, different sizes and shapes, right? And it's all part of that. But this is the thing, like, because in a movie, if you're going to have a horde of demons, you make them all look the same because it's a lot fucking cheaper.
It's
right?
cheaper and easier.
You make them all look like, so they all look like the fucking Langoliers, or they all look like whatever, like Attack the Block, or I can't remember, whatever monster movie I saw recently that's got loads of creatures that all look the same. But like, you get the, I mean, Attack the Block's a good example, right? Because that was a low budget sci-fi movie where they, you know, and I think, don't get me wrong, I'm not dissing Attack the Block. Designing those creatures fucking fantastic. Right. Also, if they're alien invaders, it makes sense that they'll all look at least similar. But these guys are not alien invaders, and Barker has no fucking interest in any notion. Like, if the whole point is like non-conformity is good, then it's no good if the non-conformists are all wearing the same fucking uniform. They're not non-conformists anymort. So Barker's like, and I just love the moment where he's like, they were unimaginable horrors, impossible to describe. And then, he's just going to go there. And it reminds, you know what, honestly, when I was reading it, I had a flash of like, kind of a hypothetical Midnight Pals, right? Where you've got Howard going like, they were completely indescribable, and Barker's like, step aside, old man.
Or I'm
going to give you
him, right? Badgering him. So what did they look like?
What do you mean?
Phil?
What do you mean indescribable?
What did they look like?
Yeah, exactly.
What did they look like? What did they look like?
Exactly.
Yeah,
shall I give you some ideas? Shall I?
It's the joyousness of it as well, isn't it? There is something in this. This story gets really dark. Actually, it's got this weird, like, this mix of tonality. Like, parts of it are comic book, parts of it are absolutely comic book. Anything that happens in the town of Welcome, those characters are comic book characters, right? And
you know what it is?
Deliberate.
He's collided Hellraiser with an American farce. That's what he's done. Because the town is fucking Keystone Cops, or actually no, Beverly Hillbillies.
It's
before
Beverly
they move,
isn't it?
Yeah,
and it's hilarious, right? It's
it's really funny.
Even when it's gross, it's funny.
Yeah, and also, I don't know, like, I mean, they are. I mean, of course, this is the thing, right? The monsters are human, the humans are grotesques, right? I mean, that's part of what's going on here.
Yeah.
But even with the grotesquerie of the humans, I find myself the elderly woman with a shotgun. I kind of liked her a bit. You know absolutely. What I mean? She had a bit of gumption about the description of her voice as being like lettuce being grated. Fucking hell, man. That's just so good.
Yes. I noticed that this time, that when I was reading, a voice like lettuce being grated. Absolutely brilliant. Like, and she's such an interesting character, isn't she?
Yeah,
she is the opposite of, is it Alice? It's Alice, isn't it? She is the opposite of Alice. This woman, she is sexless. She's kind of a matriarchal character. She is the driving force. She's almost like an evangelist, isn't she? For some reason, when she sees these monsters, he wants them gone. He wants extermination squads, man. She is like she is a stormtrooper, and she's the one who gets the town going, right?
I mean, on paper, I should hate her because she should remind me of like the woman from The Mist, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But there's something about the way Barker draws her in the story that just gives. You know what it is? It's because in the opening scene, the first time we meet her, the sheriff has gone to the body of the monster, and I love that whole thing, man. It's so funny about like the monster kicker, right? Like, he's really feeling like he's Billy Big Bollocks because he's kicked this dead monster, and of course he overstretches, he overconfident, and he ends up getting his fucking hand bitten off. But the first time we meet her is literally when she shotguns the monster's arm off to stop him being like killed, and it's like that. in isolation, that's just a badass moment, right? That's the moment where you're like, and also it's kind of funny because it's like this guy's this macho dickhead, and here's a woman to the rescue as soon as he fucks up, right? Like, so I think it's a really interesting example of where my initial impression of her was so favorable that even though everything she did from that point was, you know, objectively pretty horrible, really, I still kind of liked her just because of that opening. She had such a great opening moment, right?
Again, I think it's classic Barker. You know, he doesn't allow you easy answers. It would be so easy to just completely demonize these guys because dynamically in the story, they're the bad guys, right? They are very like in Cabal. That's the sort of thematic point of the book. You know, these people in their little town who have their very narrow and closed-minded assumptions are the bad guys. The monsters with their strange sensuality and their artistry and their wonder, the miraculous nature of them are the good guys. That's the sort of theme that's going on here. It's an inversion of Lovecraft. It's a straight up inversion of Lovecraft. But I mean, he doesn't allow that to be so simple. He just can't allow himself to do it. Even Packard, you know, the sheriff, he's an asshole. He's a complete asshole, and yet his bumbling bumptiousness and the fact that even after getting half his arm, you know, his hand gnawed off, he's still up for, you know, he's still up for doing stuff. You can't help but kind of admire him a little bit.
He's not entirely without courage, is he? I mean, you got to give him a certain amount of credit for that. I mean, I think what you said was right. I mean, interestingly, I think it's one of the few moments where, for me, Barker almost overcooks it. Is in the sense of being almost too on the nose. He actually has the city character observe that these people going out to fight and says, "Oh, you know, this is like it's like those movies where the settlers go out to murder the savages." Yeah. Right, and then he even says to himself, he's like, but of course they never make the movies about when the savages win. So these guys think they're invincible, they're not. I mean, and it's, you know,
later on, like when he describes him as Napoleon, as Bonaparte, and says, I don't really understand who that is. And the guy, because he's had his fingers injured, he's got his hand in his shirt. And it's like, for fuck's sake, that's hilarious. That's so over the top and funny and brilliant. And yet, layered through it, you've got this other stuff that's really profound. Like the story of Eugene, Alice, and ostensibly their child is really dark and unpleasant. Like Eugene is the only irredeemable character in the whole thing, right? Absolutely. He is irredeemable. He is a monster. He is patriarchy. He is male, entitled, infantile patriarchy, and he's hateful. He is absolutely hateful.
I mean, and Barker hates one of those things. Yes, and I think that's right. But I think also that it's worth sort of remembering that also he is rooted in a really a very particular animalistic form of male patriarchy, male dominance. You know, the way he behaves in the story, I can't help but forcibly be reminded of, you know, when two tribes of chimps will go to war and the victorious tribe will murder the children.
Yeah,
they will murder the baby chimps and eat them often, and then, you know, take the women folk and make their quote unquote own chimps with them. I mean, like, that is an absurd thing. And so, and again, chimps are genetically the closest animal we have to us as humans. So, you know, I am not in any way making excuses for any kind of fucking behavior because our brains are big enough. Like, we've got self-control, get on with it. But I think it's important. I think it's useful to acknowledge that in our genetic makeup, again, you know, when we were talking about evolutionary, you've only got to go back a couple of hundred million years, right? And that's what we do, quote unquote, instinctively, right? Because that's just so, you know, it's very, and I think, again, Barker is a brilliant storyteller. He understands what he's doing. He's got a situation where that male character is, you know, in the classical use of the term, he is a cuckold, right?
Yeah,
and he's
aware,
knows it.
Right? He's aware on this really weird level. He knows,
he's always known it because he was there when it happened.
He was there, right?
He was literally
so interesting.
I mean, the imagery of that, like, he was literally withdrawn from his woman just before he ejaculates. He actually, you know, he comes into the sky as the demons
It's
drag him off her.
like his disposal, the way he's disregarded, is so casual, isn't it? It's not malicious at all. He just
No.
surplus to requirements. He's
But
just.
what I'm saying is like this feeds into one of like the darkest and most deep rooted like fears of the heterosexual male, right?
Yeah.
The notion of one's mate being taken away.
And also one's child being like alien to them. That's a very male concern, isn't it? You know.
And I'm by the way, just to be crystal clear, in case anyone's wondering, I'm not saying any of this is in any way good or appropriate or quote even really natural, because what does that fucking word mean anyway? Do you know what I mean? For humans, like we're a fucking mess anyway. Like, but I think it's just I'm just talking about like these are the roots. And again, Barker, with the kind of mind he has, Barker knows that he's playing with these absolutely archetypal kind of dynamite, emotions, dynamite kind of, conceptually kind of dynamite stuff. And it's interesting because it doesn't get Eugene to the point of being a sympathetic character, but it does engender him with a sense of, I think, it does make him pitiable. Even though he's contemptible and disgusting. And I think that's really interesting.
That's it, isn't it? He's a very narrow, very simple, not particularly clever or emotionally developed man who's thrown into very abstruse and weird circumstances.
Yeah.
And that's part of what's fueling his behavior.
That's right. And then he reacts in just the worst and most predictable way. Yeah.
In fact, Barker does give him a kind of interesting moment. You know, when they come back, when the fathers come back and peel away the lid of the shack and take the boy, Eugene stares after them, and there's this great moment where he has this like desolate realization where it's like he ate to know them. Even though he's horrified, he kind of aches to know these fathers. There's something very deep and primal in him, where it's almost like they represent a life he could have had or a state of being that he could have had, and it's gone. It's been denied now. And that's part of what fuels his bitterness too. There's a kind of envy quality going on there.
Well, and of course, as the mythology is developed through the story, we realise that what he's feeling in that moment is because they are actually his fathers too.
Yeah.
He's feeling that own, right? He's feeling that pull as well, right? I mean, the other thing is we're talking about that scene, as you were describing it, and I was thinking earlier about how we were talking about the monsters, and that when we first met them, it's a parade or a carnival or some kind of celebration, some kind of rite. I mean, as it happens, we think, when you take the story as a whole, it probably is they're getting ready to get their kid back, right? That's actually probably what it's about. It's a celebration. But the other thing that it made me think of, like, there's a fairly obvious, I think, close to the surface queer reading here, right? Because the son,
totally
right? Because the son is one of the things. The son is beautiful, and it's one of the things. In fact, there's a bit of misdirection Barker does, right? Because at this point, when we first meet the three of them, we don't know about the kid's parentage. There's hints at it, but we're not really. I don't think we're supposed to know, right? I don't think we're supposed to figure it out in that first scene. And what instead he says is like, this child is for nothing except, standing in a shop window or possibly being a preacher.
He's too beautiful, right?
Right, and he shames me. His beauty shames me, right?
There's like a queer coding through the homophobia. It's really clever. It's really beautifully done. What Barker's describing here through the boy, through Aaron, is it's an almost universal fantasy of the queer kid. Which is that they dream, we dream of being other. We do. You find that in our fiction all the time, right? Go and read any queer writer that's currently operating in our particular field, Kit, and you'll find those fantasies, the fantasies of transformation, the fantasies of being removed, the fantasies of being apart, because we kind of are.
Right.
Always, particularly within family units, and particularly at the time of this writing.
Of course.
So there is a kind of like, it's Barker describing a fantasy that he probably would have had at some point, which is to be plucked away, to be taken into a strange and more mythic and poetic condition than this one that you've been born to, which in this instance is one of degradation and abuse.
Well, yeah, and crucially in Barker's case and in the case of the story, and obviously this speaks to what you're talking about, right? It's about a place where difference is accepted and celebrated rather than punished. That's the crucial difference, right? Then, which, like, of fucking course, like,
of course, right?
I mean, perfect sense.
And then the queerness of the story comes hurtling to the surface, then, doesn't it? You know,
absolutely.
And it's interesting for such a heterosexual story, because this is a story about mating and about birth and about children and about the relationships between parents and children, particularly fathers and children. You know, for a story that has all that content and those dynamics, it's powerfully queer. It's oddly queer.
And the moment when they come to claim the kid, I mean, it reminded me the thing that really rang in my brain, and I guess it's because I've watched it relatively recently, but I was thinking about the movie Pride. And I was particularly thinking about the character who's called Bromley throughout, because he's, you know, from Bromley, and they're just they're not super imaginative when it comes to me. Very imaginative in lots of other ways, but not in that particular way. But there's the moment at the end of the film where he effectively comes out to his parents and then leaves, because he has to, because his parents are from Bromley. And there's a moment when he walks into the pub where he's been hanging out with, you know, with the rest of the kind of the gays for the minors or whatever the group's called. And he meets, you know, one of the lesbian contingent, and they hang out and they have a pint. I think she buys him a drink, and there's a lovely, and then they go back to her place, and she's living in I don't know if it's a cheap rented building or a squat, but it's, you know, it's obviously kind of that, because they're on a mattress on the floor and they're just lying in bed, and they're just you know, they're just looking into each other's eyes and talking, right? And there's just this wonderful pause in the moment where she says, "If we were normal, this would be the moment where we kiss," and then they just crack up, you know. But it's a magical moment, because for me it's that thing of, like, you know, and that's where I saw the parallel with the book. It's like he's found his tribe, and he just has to have the courage to go and join it. And of course, like, you know, Pride is naturalistic. It's a real story that happened, but it's also, you know, the character of Bromley is, of course, as well as being a real person, is also symbolic of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, right, of gay children in that era who grew up, you know, especially, like, this is, again, and they keep talking about it in the show, like, literally with an age of consent that's like 5 years above if they were heterosexual. I mean, like, that there's still like level of ghettoization of just existing, right?
Well, basically criminalized, you know. Just society criminalizes you. Yeah, that's it. That's what you've got in the experience of Aaron, right?
Yeah, exactly.
This totally, like, alien quantity in that regard.
But also with Aaron, he's being recalled, or he's rejoining rejoicefully with his true family, right?
Yeah.
And Barker's like, I mean, that's what I love about it. And that's why the story needs all the otherwise kind of slightly kind of odd stuff about breeding, although there's something I want to come back to on that as well. But there's also, because there's a religious angle that I want to hit on in a minute, but there's also, like, I think because for me, what Barker is saying very clearly there is, like, you know, and I think he's probably specifically talking to his queer audience. It's like, your queer family is your real family.
Is your real family.
They are your real family. And anyone who isn't accepting of you, whoever you are, they're not your family. They're just not.
Yeah.
And fucking biology can go hang. Like, it's not
absolutely important. That's it.
You know.
I think that's one of the messages of the story, to be honest.
Yeah, I think so. And then, of course, it's tragic, because then there's, you know, the other reference point that I immediately got to when you get to the end of that story, and the tragedy of how it plays out with the kid. In my mind immediately goes to Dead Poets Society, right?
Yeah.
And the kid, and all he wants to do is act, and dad's going to send him to military school, and he'd literally rather blow his own fucking brains out. Right?
He'd rather, yeah.
And but in both cases, although in that case it's the son that pulls the trigger, and in this one it's the father. In both cases, the father is the proximate cause of the death. The father is the cause of the shooting. 100% is 100% responsible for it. Because it's, and again, why? Because they'd rather destroy their child than accept them as they are. You know? And the fury in that moment, you know, and of course then immediately the fate that follows.
Right. Which we will find echoed at the end of the film Lord of Illusions, of course. The whole thing with the ground swallowing up people, that image recurs in Lord of Illusions, which is kind of interesting. I mean, for a story that's got so much action and so much comedy, like raw comedy in it, the end is very, very downbeat and very misanthropic, isn't it? It doesn't have a particularly positive view of certain portions of humanity, this one.
No, and actually, I think the bit at the end is that makes me saddest is Lucy's fate, where because I got to admit there was a point where I thought Lucy would be going back with her son to wherever the demons come from and get to live a happy life there with her boyfriend.
That's what it sets you up to believe, right?
Yeah.
That's what it sets you up to think. But actually, Lucy's, I called her Alice earlier, don't know. It's not Alice. I don't know why I called that. It's Lucy, yeah. Lucy is almost surplus to requirements at the end, right? And she acknowledges that. She acknowledges that. She has this strange moment of revelation where it's like, I'm done in this story now. My part is over.
Yeah, and I mean, look, there's a couple of ways you could read that. I think if you want to read it in the most positive way you could say that it's Lucy acknowledging that, you know, I can't remember the name of the poet, but you know that poem, "Your children are not your children," right? They are the sons and daughters of life longing for itself. You could see it as a moment of almost like Zen-like acceptance. Even in a weird way, perhaps empowerment on her part to say like, oh, I'm kind of released from the role of mother. I've done my job. Yeah, I've done that bit, and now it is the natural order of things that my child goes out into the world and finds a wider tribe. I mean, that's okay, but I don't know. For me, I just felt a sadness.
Yeah, it is sad. It is sad, isn't it? Because like, she goes out. She is one of the only survivors of the story, for one thing.
Yeah, that's true.
She is one of the last survivors, and she's almost like the character. It's almost like she's telling the story towards the end. It's certainly from her perspective, and it's like she goes out into the world, but there's no suggestion of a continuation, is there? She even acknowledges to herself at one point that she probably will die of exhaustion before she gets anywhere.
I mean, I certainly don't. It's interesting. The ending is ambiguous because she starts to run, but I'm not convinced she's running back to the town.
No. I think she's running away.
She could be running away. She could be running to the road to get a lift. She could be running into the desert to die. I think any of those are possible. I mean, she's been asked to go back to town, but there's that wonderful moment where she looks back and she describes the what does she describe it as like punctuation from a pen, the bits of people
what she says.
It's so
glanced round once more at their trivial forms, dwarfed by the bloody sweep of the dawn sky, little dots and commas of human pain on a blank sheet of sand.
Boom. And again,
he didn't care to think of the pen that wrote them there.
Didn't care to think of the pen that wrote them there, because at that point, I'm immediately thinking about the framing narrative, right? And forcibly slam back to like the opening story, the Book of Blood, and just be like, nice.
Absolutely.
Nice.
And of course, it's a little like wry stab at like the horror writer, right? It's Barker, thing. We revel in this stuff. We revel in like the human pain and malformation and whatnot. It's very cool. But again, it's not a comedic end. It's not a positive ending, is it? It has this kind of like, ironically, fittingly enough, desert-like, desolation about it.
Absolutely. And the other thing that ties in with that is the fact that the monsters themselves are not. I mean, that's one of the really interesting things, is that the monsters, although they're physically imposing, they're not actually at any point really physically aggressive. Because the opening scene, the character's running away, and there is that wonderful moment where he sees it's got this kind of double-pronged hard-on, and he's thinking, oh my god, it's like Jesus, right? It's like, oh, I thought I was going to get eaten, now I'm worried it's going to get
because that's worse,
get raped and
for this
guy.
That's worse.
Well, absolutely, because he's heteronormative and the city guy, and that's his like he thinks he's wandered into like Deliverance Extreme Edition, right?
Exactly. And again, it's another subversion on Barker's part, isn't it? Because if this were a more standard horror story, it would be, you'd get that moment, when he curls up into a ball and he's waiting, and you get the beats. You would get those beats, and then it would be, and then he felt he sink into his blah 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 blah, and then he screamed and blah blah. That's what it would be, right? But it doesn't do that. Runs past him, and then very playfully, like a cat, attacks his car.
Well, I got to admit, there's a moment, because it lets out this whoop of joy that jumps in the car and starts to peel back the lid. I have to admit, there was a second there where I thought it was going to fuck the car. Like, which I think would have been hilarious, by the way. Like, I'm saying that I did, and it's Clive, right? It's like he could go there. He could totally decide this creature just really likes cars.
There's a story called The Age of Desire, and there is literally a scene in that where a man fucks a wall.
Okay, right. Okay,
like, so literally fucks a wall.
It's in the post.
That actually happens.
Okay. But I mean, but I love what it does there, because you're right. He just trashes it like a dog with a slipper. I mean, but either way, like and you're right. It's a gleeful thing, and also it kind of sets you up to think these creatures are really dumb, right? Because it actually ends up setting fire to itself.
It sets fire to itself, right?
It
But
splits
then
the
it
petrol
runs
tank.
away.
It says, and then it legs it off, and you're like, well, they're kind of dumb animals then, right? They're just,
I think the thing they are just so removed from human concerns, aren't they? They just don't. It doesn't even seem to be like that bothered about the fire. It's really strange. It's really peculiar. Barker's deliberately written these creatures so you only get the barest idea of what their motivations are going to be. Like Lucy, she thinks about this when she remembers the moment 6 years ago. You know, she's like, well, why? What was the purpose of this? Is this some kind of experiment? Is that why they've come back for Aaron? What is it? What is this about? And it actually isn't as cold as that, it seems. They've come back because he's their child, and they love him in a way that human parents might find difficult to express or to explore, you know?
I mean, I think there's an implication that actually in their sort of life cycle he's come of age, because of course the reason his father shoots him is because he transforms.
And
that's the last thing that happens. So it's almost like they know, for however, whether it's instinctive or through time, that they know that he's approaching the end of his pupa stage, right? He's about to become the kind of demonic butterfly creature or whatever. So that was my read of it anyway. Is that whatever it is calls them.
He's ready. I mean, it seems to be that it's Aaron himself that's calling them. He's giving out a signal, it seems, almost sometimes, like an unconscious signal.
Because that opening scene where we get a glimpse behind his eyes is so fucking weird, right? Because we don't know his parentage, and he's just got this thing about, he's going to hurt me, but I'll cope. Because the suffering's not going to last for long, and sooner or later it's going to end, and I might even be an instrument of that. And it's fine.
He's a strange child, right?
He's very strange.
At that point, he's just a strange child. You have no idea that he's actually semi-human.
No, it's really interesting the way he's drawn in that scene. Again, it's at that point Barker is actively, I think, trying to misdirect us as the reader into thinking that scene.
I think so. But he doesn't play that game very much, does he?
No, he doesn't play it for very long.
This one, he doesn't play it very long. Like he's not interested in like the sort of M. Night Shyamalan style twist.
No. And also, I think, to be fair to him as well, what he's doing in that moment in a way is he's kind of playing on our prejudices. And actually, weirdly, he's playing on our prejudices about the person we think is his father.
Eugene, right?
Yeah, because he's trying to make us think that Eugene is a more totally straightforward arsehole than he actually is. Do you know what I mean? Like there is a wrinkle to Eugene's story that makes him, as I say, not sympathetic, but certainly on some level at least pitiable, even as he's also contemptible. But you don't get any of that in the first scene. You just have contempt. He's a wife beater. I mean, he's a borderline child molester, right? The way
he's a borderline. There is something very uncomfortable, isn't there?
Yeah. The way he physically interacts with a kid, you're starting to think like, Christ. I mean, the beating is obviously bad enough, but there's also a suggestion. And again, actually, the misdirection's there as well, isn't it? Because the kid's all like, actually says something about coming of age soon or something like that. And there's this implication of like, there's going to be a change. And I think as the reader of the first time through, it's thinking like, oh God, the kid thinks he's now old enough to be attractive to this guy, right? That's the implication I took from it in that moment.
Very uncomfortable.
Oh, it's super uncomfortable. It's really gross. I do think what's clever about it is once you know what is motivating Eugene as well, like the scene makes more sense. Like it all clicks in, all the stuff that was bothering you clicks into place in a just slightly different way. Just a couple of degrees out from where you're expected it to be.
Eugene, in his own hideous, awful, blinkered way, is trying to work Aaron out, isn't he? That's what's really annoying him. He doesn't understand what this creature is, and he doesn't understand why he doesn't understand it. He talks about like, I could slit you up the middle, I could spill you out, and what would I find? What are you?
The other thing that I think is really important that Barker does, which I think is really impressive as well, is that a lot of writers would actually have cast Eugene as kind of a complete arsehole from day one. And bear in mind that we do get a brief description of the early courtship between Eugene and Lucy. And it's really interesting how in those early scenes, because King's done it, right? One of the things King worries about is male violence against women. It clearly bothers him. He's written about it a lot throughout the decades. It's a recurring theme in his work, one of many, but it is there. Like there's a solid undercurrent.
Definitely.
And one of the things that clearly bothers him, as I think it probably does a lot of people on one level or another, you can see in a lot of those works, he's almost visibly trying to work out like why do women fall for these dangerous men? Why do women stay with these dangerous men? And he's, you know, that's one of the things that he's worrying at in his fiction. And, you know, he comes up with different answers as he goes. But we've seen in King's fiction more than one time, and he'll normally find a way of couching it, whereas, like, you know, there was a dangerous edge to him, but he was so handsome, or he behaved in a certain way, and blah blah blah. And you know, I'm not disrespecting that. I think that's King again. He's an honest writer. He's trying to make sense of the world with the best of his abilities. And I think for some women and some men, that will be the story or part of the story. I don't think it's unusual. But I love how Barker takes a different tack here. And actually, when you learn about their early relationship, that he seems really fucking into her. And even, you know, Barker even makes a point of saying, like, he goes down on her a lot. Like,
it was,
you know, it was
a wonderful,
pleasure.
It was a wonderful courtship that they had, a wonderful relationship. You get the impression that Eugene is a man ruined by life, right?
Right.
That's the impression.
This one event happens, and Eugene is completely broken by it, and immediately reverts to this kind of Neolithic, you know, patriarchal psychopath.
Well, because he becomes patriarchy, doesn't he? He basically becomes like the example of patriarchy in this. I mean, that's the other thing, right? This is a continuation of the themes in Jacqueline S. It's powerfully feminist. I mean, this just goes. It just goes like totally like Helen Caesar, Raft of the Medusa. Men are a different species. They are a mistake. That's the great thing. The story actually dares to say it creates this mythology where men are the children of women who are a separate species to men in this mythology, by the way, and the monsters
always existed. By the
and
way,
women have always existed. Yeah, I mean that's mythological, isn't it? That's Barker going mythological. He's going right back to the roots of old mythology. That's like the Sea of Tiamat stuff. That's really deep mythology. That is. It's Gaia, it's all that stuff, you know, it's the mother goddesses, blah, blah, it's all that kind of thing, you know. But I love the fact that men are in error, that the monsters are trying to correct.
It's even cheekier than that, because it's like there's always been women, there's always been demons, and then one day demons made men with women to be women's playthings. That's explicitly said. It's like women wanted they want. I mean, and then they just got completely out of control, you guys.
Yeah, they just went wrong, right? They just went wrong.
All the bad ones killed all the good ones. And just perpetuated in their own image. And it's like, that's fucking great.
Yeah, it's so like very powerfully feminist. And it's also very sort of like anti-Eden. It's anti-Genesis, isn't it? You know, it's drawing a contrast to the assumptions of like Abrahamic mythology.
But I think also as a kind of like mythological origin story for patriarchy, like it's pretty fucking good actually.
It's pretty good, isn't it? As a metaphor, it's really fucking good. And it's again, it does this thing with both the male characters in the book, but men in general. It diminishes them. It makes them into these confused, slightly entitled children who never know what's going on, who never understand. They don't. The reason they don't understand women, because women are a separate entity to them. Right.
And frankly, fairly explicitly in this story, a superior one. I mean, there's no real like bones made about it. They just. I mean, whatever way it is, they cope better with the fact of these monsters than the male characters do. Universally. Because you know, there's the scene where she actually has sex with like 4 or 5 of the demons, and the text is at very great pains through her eyes to let us know this is not an assault in any way at all. It is an act of love that she willingly participates in, and gains pleasure from. And indeed, again, it goes really clear. Like, in fact, there's a melancholy when it's over because she's like, that was it. That was the high point of my life. Yeah, in fact, there's a weird little echo for me in that moment of the hills, the cities, you know, where the guy's like, I've got to be a part of this thing because I'm never going to see anything this amazing again. And it's going to kill me, but I don't care. And there's a feeling of that. Go on. It's
consistent in Barker. It's that ache to be part of the miraculous, of the other that's in all of us, but which many human beings suppress and deny. Probably for the sake of sanity, right? Because they're afraid that it will break them.
Yeah, but also
you can't be part of it.
I mean, there is that, but I also think what I like about Barker is he acknowledges that, but he also acknowledges the cost.
Yeah,
You know, like he's
right.
upfront about that too. It's like, yeah, and it may fucking destroy you.
And
Like
it does.
the risk is real, the danger is real. You know,
Yeah.
like yeah, it may. Um,
And
so I
this
think that's
very much does. It very
yeah.
much does.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of delayed death for Lucy, right? It's kind of like a death of a thousand cuts, but it's definitely there. But this is the other thing I really wanted to pick up on, because when we're talking about mythology and stuff, the other thing that occurred to me in a massive way in that moment, especially with the descriptions, particularly of the demons that take her, you know, her soon-to-be husband away and make love to her. They very much remind me of certain biblical descriptions of angels,
Angels,
right?
yes.
Because you know
Yeah.
how, like, in the Bible, that angels are fucking mental. Like
They're
they
men.
are,
Yeah.
they're not cherubs with fucking wings. They are
No, they're not Renaissance painting.
mind buggering,
Oh,
like what the
yeah.
fuckness, right?
Hot
And I had a bit
fields
of a
of
moment there. It's like
fire.
I was like, Clive, what are we doing here, man? Is this
Yeah.
you're like
Yeah.
trying to one up the Bible? You're saying instead of Gabriel, there's like 5 of them this time, and it's this
Well,
really,
it's,
really loving kind of orgy with 1 woman, 5 angels. Okay, all right.
again, you've got that kind of prototype of certain things that will occur later, haven't you? I mean, literally, you've got a literal angel in Weave World, the Scourge,
Sure,
of course,
sure.
Uriel of
Yeah,
Principalities. And the way Uriel is described is very akin to these creatures, isn't it?
yeah, yeah.
Very akin to these creatures.
Yeah, and I just love the idea that, you know, he's, you know, Barker's almost like doing a kind of, there's almost like a second coming story buried in here, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, totally. I mean, Aaron has got a biblical name, right? Very
Right.
deliberately, very
Yeah,
deliberately. The thing that I get from Aaron is that he is potentially like the messianic character. He
yeah,
could be the
exactly.
character that heals humanity and the monsters, right? That brings them together again. That heals all of the wounds of history and tradition. But because men in particular, are so wounded and pathetic
Yeah,
and broken, they can't allow it. They'll never allow it. He's
yeah,
too different. They will destroy their own children. They will destroy what they should love, and they will actively destroy the source of their own salvation out of fear.
yeah, yeah. And you know, I think it kind of makes me think about, you know, I mean, thinking back to some of the conversation we had earlier, right? But one of the things that it makes me think about is that kind of, and you know, I've talked about this before. Like, I mean, you know, I need to be a bit careful about what I'm going to say. Like, if you go to the New Testament and you just look at the things that Jesus actually said and did,
Mhm.
I'd still have some fairly serious philosophical disagreements with the dude. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Like, but he's a lot more interesting and a lot less fucking reactionary than the, you know, I'd say like a large proportion of his believers' behavior might make you think, right? Jesus is an
Absolutely.
interesting guy, right?
Yes.
And he said some interesting stuff.
Mhm.
And I think, you know, one of the things that I think we talked about before in other contexts is like the irony of the kind of, especially I'm thinking now of like the kind of rapture worshipping kind of fucking fundamentalist
Fundamentalists,
evangelical
yeah.
wing of the, you know, the kind of
Sort of
transphobic,
revivalist
homophobic,
movement, yeah.
fucking family first psychopaths of the American, you know, religious right.
Yeah.
The great irony, of course, is if the second coming did happen in America, it would literally be those people nailing him to a fucking tree. Like,
Absolutely, they would be the last people to accept him, wouldn't they?
yeah,
They would be turning him away. They'd be lucky to survive in their
yeah.
company, quite
No,
frankly.
I mean, they really would. They'd actually be the ones hammering the fucking nails. They
Totally,
absolutely would.
totally.
With, you know, with no kind of sense of irony or understanding whatsoever.
But
You know, so
that's part of the thing going on here as well, isn't it? I mean, like they're from a very small, isolated Arizonan town, right?
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
they would, you know, and here they have evidence of the miraculous. They literally have it walk up to them into the middle of town,
yeah.
evidence of the miraculous. And what's their first reaction? What's their first reaction? It's to destroy it.
Oh,
It's to
it's better than that. The line is so fucking, and actually, it's the moment where I think Barker, if he hadn't already, like, he really tips his hand when he gives the line. He's like, "We're gonna find him and we're gonna lynch him."
we're gonna yes, I mean, again,
Oh, dude,
and it's very deliberate, that word.
very
It's
deliberate.
so deliberate. Um Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and like,
we know
you know
what
what
he's
he's
doing,
saying.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Clearly, there's so many parallels here. There's so many. Again, the monsters and Aaron become like just this vast vessel for any kind of marginalized demographic, right?
This
Any
is a
demographic
thing.
that's
Yeah,
marginalized by history. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Marginalized and persecuted, right? And then
Yes.
they become the symbol of all of that. They become the kind. And again, that does fit. If you, like I said, if you do think about the opening kind of dance and parade as a pride parade,
Mm,
like that works, that fits.
totally
Because
fits.
like the one of the great things, I think it's one of the things that certain powers that be find so scary actually about the pride banner, under all of their flim flam about morality and children and blah, blah,
Mm.
which is always just horseshit.
It's always bullshit. Yeah.
Underneath, what they're scared about is how it represents like a fundamental, almost an instinctive level, like an understanding of like practical, real life, real world fucking solidarity
Yeah.
amongst marginalized people, right?
That's exactly
And
it.
God forbid that we get the idea that we've got more in common than we do that separates us. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
God forbid we start talking to each other and realize where the real forms of oppression are actually coming from in our fucking lives, and it's not 99 times out of 100 each other at the
That's
level of
exactly it.
working class. It's happening. Oh, let's have a look up there for a second. What are those guys doing
Yeah.
over there?
Right.
You know,
Exactly that. Exactly that.
and
I mean,
that's
it's
why it's
interesting,
got to be
isn't it?
commodified. That's why it's got to
Yep.
become corporate sponsored. That's why it's got to be safe. That's why we've got to keep the
Well, it's got
leather
to be
boys out,
tamed,
because it's
right?
going to scare
Yeah.
the children.
It's got to be
It's got to be
tamed. It's got
tamed.
to be tamed. We've got
Got
to
to be
take the
tamed.
teeth away, right?
That's
Got to
right.
take the teeth away. Can't be a riot anymore. We're not. It
That's
can't be
right.
a protest anymore. We can't have that.
Can't be riot brought to you by Barclays. It's never going to work.
No. No. No.
No,
No. No. No.
no. It's got to be live, love, laugh.
But
You know.
that's it, right? I mean, and isn't it interesting, like how passive the monsters are in this? I mean,
Yeah, but
I think that's one
that's
of
what I
the
was coming. Yeah,
things.
yeah, absolutely. Go
I
on,
think it's
go.
one of the things that confuses people about the story because they're coming to it expecting a horror story in a more classical vein, right?
Yeah,
And they're at least expecting the monsters to react when they're being assaulted, which they do to a degree, but not in any grand way.
no,
What they're doing is retreating most of the time. They are almost entirely passive entities. Not only are they passive, but they're vulnerable.
they're afraid.
They're
They
afraid,
have
right?
physical displays of fear, and
Yeah,
actually, it makes them less substantial even at the very end when they have that big confrontation.
yeah.
Now, I think you could read it as that's what is perceived by one of the human aggressors, and it might be that what they perceive as that is actually the demons working some kind of magic that takes them back to their area and triggers the sand, right? So I think it's ambiguous, that particular reading. What's not ambiguous is when they change colors to demonstrate that they're fearful, because that's
Right.
seen through the eyes of the kid, and he knows
Yes.
what's going on. He has an instinctive understanding of because they're his fathers, right? So he sees that. So they are definitely fearful. And yeah, you're right. I mean, you've got one of them, beats up a car, accidentally sets itself on fire and ends up in town, and then eats the guy's fingers. But really, I mean, you could read that as kind of self-defense or surprise or whatever.
Yeah,
Like
or
it's
a reaction, right? It's just like a
yeah,
reaction because
exactly.
it's burnt half to death, isn't
Yeah,
it?
exactly. It's and then one of them is left behind to take a physical stand while the rest escape.
Mhm.
And that one does some damage, right?
Yeah.
But, before it's finally, because they throw a fucking grenade at it, right?
Yeah, but
It's
only
just
in
like,
extremis,
Jesus
right?
Christ.
Only in extremis and only in defense of the others. It's so
Exactly.
interesting. It's
Yeah,
so
it is.
interesting. And the fact that I mean, I don't know about you, but I always ache for the monsters to get away. You want them to be safe, right?
Yeah. Or depending on who they're up against, you want them to feed. But yeah.
You want them to feed, right? Yeah, I mean,
win.
I think that's another thing about the story. To be honest, I think a lot of people who read it really want the monsters to turn around and start acting
Just
like
flatten the
monsters,
town.
right?
Yeah.
And that would have been almost like the cheap way to go about it, wouldn't it? To make it almost like a vengeance thing, so the monsters flare up and become truly monstrous and rampage through the town and slaughter everybody.
But you know
that
what?
takes away something of the profundity for me.
Exactly. Also, actually, if he'd done that, it would have completely fucked the morality of the story.
Would.
Because if you do that, then the moral of the story is, well, aren't we all monsters really? And like, fuck that liberal both sides bullshit.
Yeah.
No, Barker's got so much more interesting. It's like, no, the monsters are way kinder.
Yeah.
They're more merciful. They have more capacity for fear, for love, for hope.
In that regard, it's actually a nastier story, isn't it? It is a nastier story in that regard because it really is holding up this very dark mirror to humanity. There's a misanthrope Aaron, right?
I think no. I think it's holding up a very dark mirror to patriarchy. I don't think it's humanity as a whole, and I think it's an important distinction because I think you're right in that it is darker for the heteronormative people who don't acknowledge their privilege, and for them, I'm sure it's one of the most horrific stories they're ever going to read, right? And actually, like, probably offensive. The notion that men might be a mistake. You know what I mean? Like that is. I mean, that is. If you were really invested in that framework, that's that. In fact, here's a word for you. That's almost blasphemous.
Yeah,
to patriarchy. Right. You know.
Yeah.
And you've got to love. By the way, side note, you've got to love a text this feminist and this kind of anti that particular form of masculinity, at the very least, being written by a fucking gay man. I mean, the chops on this guy, like, come on.
Yeah, I know, right?
Clive.
It's incredible. And also it has such expressions of rah masculinity through it as well. It, right? I mean, like, the action scenes are like straight out of a really sort of big budget action film, right?
Oh god,
it's full of testosterone. It's full. It's all of these male archetypes. The way the dialogue is written, it's from those films as well. Right?
Oh god, the whole thing. I mean, that wonderful moment when he's given the big, and it's really shitty speech too, and he does that whole thing about mother's tit, and he literally congratulates himself in his head for the phrase mother's tit and how fucking great it is. Like, and that is just like, it's almost too much, right? But it's really funny.
That's the other thing the story's doing all the way through, is there's like a tightrope that it's walking.
It's through. It's playing chicken with its own absurdity the whole way through, especially with the town and the townsfolk. And he's always like teetering on the very edge of like outright parody, outright absurdity.
Pantomime, like, sometimes.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
it's almost like, you'd expect like Gene Wilder to be in the film adaptation, right?
Sure.
Preferably
alongside Richard Pryor, right?
Yeah. It does get really, that like, silly a couple of times.
Yeah.
But somehow that is not incongruous with all of the darker stuff and the more profound implications. It just works, man.
Yeah, but you know why? Because again, I think the key line genuinely is, and I didn't think this at the start, but since we've been talking, I really do think the key line is that one about when the guy says, "Oh, they think it's just like the movies," and they're forgetting that they don't make movies about the times the settlers lose.
Yeah,
and that's the thing. It's like, and what I like about that is it almost undercuts the farcical elements, because it's like, yeah, they are acting like stereotypes, but they're acting like stereotypes because that's what they've been fed.
That's what they've been fed, right?
And they're believing their own bullshit. They're high on their own supply of like toxic masculinity and patriarchy and bullshit. So and they do even sound, they sound like B-movie versions, because they haven't got the fucking A-list writer writing the scripts. They are a fucking knockoff. They're a cargo cult. Of their own bullshit, right? Like, so they do have B-movie dialogue because they're fucking C-list entities. You know what I mean? Like,
and it's so all based, isn't it? As you were saying, it's all based in this sort of like this patriarchal anxiety about status, isn't it?
Right.
And Packard's been undermined. I mean, the first thing he's trying to do is like win points by like kicking what's ostensibly the burned corpse of a monster, man. You know, it's like, you're not really doing that much, are you, mate?
Yeah, that whole thing where he self-describes himself as like the brave monster kicker. I mean, that absolutely cracked my shit up.
It is so funny. He's like the more comedic, buffoonish side of patriarchy, isn't he? In many respects, whereas Eugene is the really dark stuff.
Oh. Yeah, except it turns on a dime, because he is all of that, but then you realise that he does get him eventually. He gets his shit together and he gets them all riled up enough to go and get a bunch of guns and go and try and kill all the monsters. It's like, actually, often, I'm afraid, the people in the torches and the fucking white hoods are buffoons. They're still lethal.
This is the thing, right? Things can be ridiculous and dangerous at the same time. I think Clark's really getting at that here.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Like for themselves more than anything else, right? Sure. I mean, these guys are suicidal. They are so blinded and high on this sort of testosterone-driven, I've got to regain my status thing,
Yeah.
They are willing to put themselves in the most mortal danger. They know nothing about these creatures. Their world has been shattered in an afternoon. They have been shown that there are monsters, there are miracles. These things could be demons from hell for all they know. They could have incredible magical capacities, and they go after them with guns and trucks.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, one of them brings a rocket launcher, so they're
One
really
of them
taking it
does bring
seriously.
rocket launcher, yeah. And even that, I mean, Barker even doesn't take that seriously. Sort of like they're more likely to blow themselves up with it. Let's be honest.
Well, that's the other thing that's fun, isn't it? Because you've got that guy from out of town. You've got the out of town who we meet at the start of the story. The guy kind of kicks off the narrative in a way.
Yeah.
And again, another telling moment that you get with that character is where he has this really interesting dual consciousness in a lot of those scenes where he's on one level he's kind of scoffing at the hillbillies and their lunacy, but then there is a moment where he sort of says to himself, "Oh, but I've got to admit I've got a begrudging kind of respect for what they're trying to do here." And he can you can see him kind of. It's almost like he's, what it reminds me of is like that thing about like scratch a liberal, find a conservative. Like it's like he's kind of it's almost like he feels the pull of that tribal patriarchal thing. Yeah, exactly. The awful kind, and it's like he thinks he's above it and beyond it and more civilized because he lives on the coast rather than in the middle and he's got a suit. But actually, like, he's just as susceptible to that bullshit, And he does end up going with them, right? He ends up getting. He does
go with them. I think he survives, doesn't he, Davidson?
Yeah, I think so.
He kind of like just fizzles out of the story, if I remember correctly. He kind of just like goes away. He is sort of present at the end, and he is once again like narrating almost.
Yeah. He becomes a point.
He's observing. He's basically observing what's going on in an almost dispassionate way, and I think the story spares him exactly because of his lack of involvement.
Yeah. But it's funny how like his reaction kind of mirrors mine about the townsfolk, and that thing like where I was saying at the beginning, like you do kind of, there is a certain courage to what they're doing and blah 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 blah. Because like he kind of expresses that in the story. But then it's interesting, isn't it? We get to this point in the conversation, and I'm kind of second guessing my own reaction. It's like, but they're fucking monsters. They are actually like. What's admirable about what they do? Absolutely nothing. There is nothing admirable about.
It is quixotic. I mean, the Don Quixote is another like massive influence on the story. Obviously,
Sure.
I mean, everything they do is basically quixotic. It's hateful. It's driven by hate and misunderstanding, and they just assume these creatures are that they are deranged monsters. They've seen really nothing of them. They don't take a moment to analyze at all or to consider. Everything is based on this weird mythological assumption that they are demons, that they're because they're different, because they are not what is standard or accepted, they are de facto evil, right? And it's the fact that they are disruptive, just by the fact of their existence. That's what's really evil, quote unquote, about them.
Yeah, and I mean also like again, and it ties in with the language of lynching, which is a very explicit and specific trope. There is also expressed the kind of I mean at that point in the story, for the people saying it, entirely baseless idea that they're here to take away the women.
We're here to take away the women, right?
Like, come on, man. And again, when you connect that with lynching, like, then you've got a very clear prism of like, well, we're well aware of what that particular, like, that particular tunnel of like prejudicial thought and where that's rooted, like where that comes from and what that fuels, right?
Totally.
Like,
totally. Yeah, it's deliberate. I mean, for a writer like Barker, that is not casual. That is not just. That is pointed language, as is a lot. I mean, it's just like Eugene, the insults that Eugene uses when he's effectively abusing his son. It's the fact that he's pretty, it's the fact that he's queer, he's gay, he's this, he's that. That's the ultimate shame, right? It's pointed. There's a reason he's using that particular language here. It's an amazing story, actually. I really, again, it's not a story that comes up very much in discussions of Blood or Barker in more general terms, but it's an absolutely incredible story, and it's one I always remember. It's had a massive effect on me, definitely. The monsters in particular. the way he describes the monsters and
yeah.
the joyousness of it, the absolute joy, which is the total antithesis of Lovecraft. You know,
Yeah.
that did something to me when I first read these books. It was like, yeah, you can do this. You can make monsters beautiful and interesting and sympathetic. They don't just have to be the antagonists or the thing to loathe or whatever. They can be something else. They can be beautiful. They can be even desirable.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder if one of the reasons it's perhaps less well celebrated than some of the other stories in there is the humor, right? I mean, I think there is a weird thing that happens for a lot of people where when people find something humorous, even if they enjoy it on a humorous level, it somehow devalues it as art.
Right.
It's a weird thing.
Isn't that fascinating? Because there's such profundity in the story too. There's so much going on under the surface, and the humor feeds into that. It's not incongruous or separate from it. The humor's part of it.
I mean, also, yeah, and also the best comedy can also be incredibly profound in and of itself. Can be incredibly moving. Can be incredibly, contain incredible pathos or empathy or understanding. Like, I mean, I even think about for me, like some of the my all-time Pantheon Hall of Fame stand-up comedians. So you think about people like Richard Pryor, late, especially late career Bill Hicks, right? Their comedy is not. I mean, it's let's start with Hicks had his moments, but the majority of it is not punching down; it's punching up, right? And they understood that before that phrase was even in the language, But but also, some of the biggest laughs come from they're funny because they're expressing some kind of truth or some kind of deeply rooted human thing that's kind of painful, but also kind of raw, but also funny because of how they've approached the idea or approached it, and the laugh doesn't diminish the pathos of that one bit. I mean,
no,
I always think about Pryor, the '78 concert, which is I think is probably the best stand-up comedy routine that's ever been committed to film. I mean, that's just my opinion, right? But I think and there's a moment in there where he does this, and it is screamingly thigh-slappingly funny routine about his childhood and his upbringing. And he's actually describing his own abuse, right? He's describing the physical abuse he experienced at the hands of his mother and his father in different ways, and yet, and the fact of it being funny, I mean, funny enough that you're kind of in physical pain from laughing, doesn't remove the pathos of what he's talking about one bit. It doesn't impact on that at all. And it's still delivered this incredible, this incredible story, right? This incredible kind of autobiography, this incredible kind of vivid image of a time and a place and a person and a child in this kind of extraordinary and really unpleasant set of circumstances, right? Who is now a man standing in front of you telling jokes about it that are so funny you're worried you're going to wet yourself. I mean, it's amazing.
This is a problem we have, isn't it? It's a problem we often have as human beings, that we find it difficult to understand that things can be they can have multiple different aspects that are not contradictory.
But don't you think as horror fans we should fucking know better?
We should, but do we though? Do we? That's the thing. We should. I mean, and I imagine that's gotten worse over time as Barker's reputation has become more solidified, right? Because people don't expect to come to a Barker story, quote unquote, and laugh.
Right.
That's bizarre, right? I mean, it is rip-roaringly funny. I laughed out loud at this a couple of times. And
also, because there is a rich vein of humor that runs through, I think, certainly all of Barker's work that I've read. I haven't ever read one that hasn't had moments of levity, moments of genuine kind of comedy of some kind or another.
There's often a wryness to his writing, even when he's being really profound, right? I mean, incredibly profound. There is this sort of working class roots wryness about everything, right?
I mean, I still don't have the courage to quote it, but there is a line from The Great and Secret Story that is simultaneously one of the most genuinely disturbing things I've ever read anywhere, and hysterically fucking funny. And part of the reason it's so funny is because it's so wrong.
Yeah,
and you can see it is almost one of those moments where you feel like just Barker just turning to the camera and kind of winking and grinning, and his tooth kind of going ting, fucking got ya,
I got away with this.
That's gonna live in your head rent free the rest of your fucking life.
Yeah.
You're welcome. And it's what are you supposed to do, man? And it is like, and again, that's a good example because it's funny. It is horrific. It's also really bleak. It's also it's all that shit all at once. You know what I mean? And it's kind of it's too much.
And it's amazing how
yeah.
often he does go there in the Books of Blood, right? I mean, like
Yeah,
most of the stories we've read thus far, there are very few that have been like one note. Most of them have had variations in tone and ethos and significance.
Yeah, I think it would be rare, actually, thinking about it. It'd be an interesting exercise, wouldn't it? I think it would be rare to find. I think you'd struggle to find a Barker book, even one of his bleakest or darkest, that's entirely devoid of humor.
Oh,
because
yeah,
I think it's just part of his DNA. You know, I think he's just got it. You know, it's just part of who he is. It's part of his worldview. And I think, you know, and I think he probably recognises comedy as a legitimate as an art form as horror, right? I'm sure
anything else, right? Yeah,
as anything else, right? And again, like anything else, right? Like, you know, the top 10% will be awesome, and the bottom 70% will be shit, and that's all art forms. Like, you don't judge an art form by the 50, 60, 70% of it that's shit. I mean, what would be the point, right?
I mean, he's always said as well. I mean, he's primarily, despite the incredible cleverness of his work, he's always about the visceral primarily. You know.
Oh, sure.
And what's more visceral than a laugh, right?
Right, and and that's also why, like, he never shies away from carnality, right? Because he sees that as also as visceral in its way, and he's right.
Totally.
And I love that about. But also, like, I love the way, and it's so funny. Like, it's that thing when you read it as a kid or as a teenager, as I was with Barker, you don't realize how special it is until you realize how absent it is elsewhere. It's, you know, like, the carnal is kind of like the nearest Barker gets to the sacred, right?
Yeah. He doesn't draw a distinction.
Yeah, for him,
carnality
is like, it's like the nearest he gets to a spiritual experience, and his characters as well. And I love that.
I do love that. I mean, because it's so it shouldn't be transgressive, but it is transgressive to state, isn't it? You know.
Well, it's transgressive for patriarchy, right? Because patriarchy is so fucked when it comes to sex. Sorry, that was a really bad pun. But I didn't mean it. I wasn't aiming. That just happened. But, you know, it is. It's like, I mean, you know, when you look at the patriarchal prescriptions around, like, sex, it's like, wow, you guys just don't want anyone to enjoy themselves ever, right?
It's fucked about the body, isn't it? It's got a real problem with anatomy. Patriarchy does. It's about teaching us to be utterly revolted and ashamed of our anatomies and every process that they have. Whereas Barker's just not about that. He finds that absurd he finds it absurd in a very rationalist way. It's like, we are our bodies. It's the universal thing. We all have them. We all experience them, and every element of them. So why are we buying into these ideologies and these assumptions that teach us to be ashamed of them and afraid of them and alienated from them?
And, you know, the Barker celebrates liberated sexuality in whatever form it takes. I mean, he, you know, and we talked about this before when we talked about other books as well. Like, I mean, it's interesting how he is is a gay male writer, and yet, certainly to this point in the Books of Blood, the majority of sexual encounters that have happened in the book, not all of them, but the majority are heterosexual encounters.
That's pretty much true for most of his work, to be honest.
But the thing is that when Barker writes a heterosexual sex scene, it's so interesting because it is so different from how, sadly, a lot of straight male writers write sex scenes. I
don't think it's primarily from the female perspective.
Often it's from the female perspective. It often centers female pleasure in a way that, sadly, a lot of male writers.
I hate the fact that it's still a thing that we have to talk
how
about.
Weird is that?
Like, Barker's women like sex.
Yeah,
that is not a problem. That is not a taboo. It is not. It shouldn't be transgressive, but it is.
Also, to be fair, Barker is also capable of writing straight men who actually genuinely adore women. They don't want to fuck them because they're angry with them. They don't want to fuck them because they want to. They are sublimated anything.
No, they are like.
They're just really fucking into women. Like, they're just really, really like. Right. I mean, I'm thinking about Magica again, obviously.
Yeah, you think of Gentle, right? I mean, Gentle can't exist without women, right? He literally says it's not an addiction. He can't function outside of their company.
And it's like, but what I love about Gentle is like it's the character who on paper is like the definition of problematic, right? Like the womanizer, the kind of, but the difference is Gentle. Well, there's two things. One, Gentle is completely honest with the women that he's with about who he is and about how he is and about his sexuality and the fact that he, will not be tied down and blah blah blah. So like there is a level of honesty. So it's not like he's not cheating. It's not that kind of thing. But also like, because we're inside his head in that book for some of it, like he's not doing it out of he's not doing it it's not about domination, it's not about conquest, it's just about celebration. It's just like women's bodies, just he fucking loves them. Like he's really really excited by it, and he wants to spend as much time as he can. Totally. And again he's it's pleasuring women that's what gets him off. That's the key thing. It's like, in creating that state of pleasure in women, that's Gentle's kind of like, that's kind of the reason I exist, really. Like everything else is just great.
Absolutely. Which is ironic given that, massive spoilers, by the way, guys, but he is like the greatest magicians and sorcerers who's ever existed in reality, right? It's fantastic, isn't it? It's utterly fantastic. Yeah, he does have, I mean, for a gay guy, he has a real fascination with female pleasure. That comes through constantly in his work, and I imagine part of it is because it is so transgressive to talk about it, right? Even in work that features prominently the sexual acts, you often don't see that. You don't get it described. It's almost like particularly a lot of male writers are a little afraid of going there. Yeah.
And if it is done, it's often done in just such a terrible way that it's like, okay, this is someone who's watched a lot of porn and never actually slept with a real woman. Like, you know what I mean? Like, because it's like, that's not how biology works, guys.
Exactly.
So yeah, no, I agree completely.
It's the emotional experience too, right? Like, what women are experiencing and what they take from it and what they want from it,
But also the idea that sex can be an emotional experience for men too, because that's one of the big lies of patriarchy. Is that sex isn't something that can be have an emotional component for men. Right. It's just something we do because we're swaggering around with our fucking balls full of semen and we've got to empty them.
That is the most bizarre thing. That is the most bizarre thing, isn't it? Because I don't see how it can't be.
Well, but that's where you end up with this shit. You end up with people like Andrew Tate on Twitter saying like, sex is 10 minutes of something I don't really like for 30 seconds that I actually enjoy. And you're just saying like, I mean, you're doing it all wrong. Every bit of it is completely wrong. Yeah. Every single bit of it is completely wrong. Also, are you sure you're not gay? I'm not saying you should be, and I wouldn't wish on gay men either. No, fair enough. I wouldn't wish him on gay men. I did say I was clear about that. I wouldn't wish him on gay men. No. And I hope he is gay and then he can never get laid again the rest of his life. That would be kind of poetic justice, really.
That would be perfect, wouldn't it?
It would, yeah. Every single gay man meets is like, no, you're Andrew Tate, fuck off into the sun.
You are repulsive, so no way.
But no, I'd have to hand in my gay card, and I don't want to do that, so go away. I think that you get that, you get that mentality, and you're just looking at it and thinking, like, well, what the like? I don't even know where to start with you, man. You're just living on a different planet to me, And I think that's, and it's, I was thinking about this, like, it's one of those things where I realized, like, I'm really grateful to have had Barker in my life, not just as a creative force and as a challenge, right? It's like, this is how good this shit can be. So like, bring your A game.
It's how you can do it, right?
Yeah. But specifically on this point about giving me like a really positive portrayals of like heterosexual sexuality from a male perspective. That's like, this is something where like female pleasure, fucking amazing, man. You want to be in there for that. It's great. You know what I mean?
As well, isn't it? It's not shamed at all. It's like, no, it doesn't like, it doesn't shy away from any aspect. And it's like, no, this is what you should be enjoying. This is something you should be like reveling in and not being ashamed of. And
and directly related to that. Yeah, and directly related, and I would say inextricably linked from that, like sex is an emotional act for men as well as a physical act. It's an emotional act, or it can be, or it's better when it contains an emotional component, right? Which might be the fairer way of putting it, I guess. And it's like that it's probably a good thing that came into my life when it did. The age that I was when I was just getting to the point where I was going to start having those kind of relationships, right? that was a, that I had that, and I didn't know it was a model in my head. Like, and
No,
look, obviously,
of course.
also it's helpful that it resonated very deeply with kind of what I felt instinctively, but didn't have a very good way of expressing because there weren't too many people talking about it in the world, right? So there was a resonance, but yeah, like
to have this as to have like Barker's work as an influence during those formative years when you are sort of exploring your own sexual identity, that's a good thing.
That's a good thing. But I mean, like I say, and it's interesting because obviously I've done this show with you. I did a show with horror author Jasper Bark, who's bisexual, and well, when we spoke with David about In the Hills of Cities, right, and he's bisexual, and he talked, and you talked about how The Hills of Cities was so important for all of you for that moment of like,
yeah. We can,
go on.
We can explore this. We can. Right. We are allowed.
Well, we're exist, allowed. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, and so
we're
it's
in
great
this genre,
Yeah, exactly. About? And the fact that the same writer who delivered that experience also, for me, I'm realizing, like, delivered me as a straight guy, right, as a heterosexual guy, like, and here's a really positive depiction of how male heterosexuality can function in the world. Right. And yeah, you can absolutely be horny as hell and want to sleep with everything that moves. That's cool. Just make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Center female pleasure, center female agency and consent, and love it.
It's human,
and
right?
Open yourself up to the emotional dimension of it as well as the physical, and off you go, have a good time.
Yeah, I think I remember watching an interview with Barker where he said he was talking about someone. I think the interviewer asked him, like, so is there anything that sort of stops you writing? And he said, oh yes, sex does, because it's the most. It is like it's one of the few things that's magical for everyone.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
That is reaffirming for almost all of us. Yeah. So it's so fundamental to his understanding of human interaction and reality, and I just love the fact that whatever influences he's had, it's brought him to the point where he can see it. Yeah, and he doesn't buy into the hypocrisies that just blanket our cultures and our histories and our traditions. He just doesn't buy into them at all.
And there's just a hint in this story, I think, and it is just a hint, and this may be me reading too much into it, but there's just a slightest hint that Barker is saying, like, there's something inherently liberatory about specifically queer sex. And the reason I say that is because, Lucy's having good sex with her suitor. They're having a lovely time with each other, enjoying each other. But the pinnacle is when the demons arrive. To take things to a whole nother level for her. And again, if we're reading the demons as this personification of queerness in the most broad possible terms, which I think is supported by, as I said, the spectrum of physical depictions that you have of these creatures, right? The fact that they are this incredible kind of kaleidoscopic collection of physical specimens of various kinds, which is also reflected in and again, I want to, like, very brief kind of description of this sexual scene as well. This is not some massive pages of like monster porn. That's not what's going on here.
No, it's not what's happening.
It's a couple of paragraphs, and like for something that involves several demons having sex with a woman in a consensual and loving way, it's quite delicately done.
Yeah, it really is.
It's a strange sentence to say, but it's true. I promise, it really is.
But it's true. It's true. He really takes pains to ensure that this is not in any way an imposition or violent or painful or unwelcome. It is this strange dream, like hazy experience, isn't it? Like revelatory.
Yeah. And as we say, she basically spends the rest of the story kind of feeling melancholic about about knowing that moment has passed and is not likely to come again. And I think that for me, it's there's almost that undercurrent hint of like there's an inherent kind of liberation quality to specifically queerness when it comes to sexuality. And interestingly, it's still a kind of, in some senses, it's still a kind of heteronormative in the sense that they are male, she is female, because they're making a baby. There's a biological component to it. Right. But there's also this hint of queerness around it because of the demons and what they represent, and because of so it's really, and I love that because it's almost like he's chipping away at the edges of like it's like he's he's even chipping away at the edges of like heteronormative sex and saying like, you know, it's not like, partly it's like there's ways of doing this that aren't rigidly patriarchal reinforcement, right?
Yes.
But it's, yeah, I just like it. I like this idea of like there's a better way of doing this.
It doesn't have to be prescribed. You can experiment.
Exactly.
It can be interesting. It can be fun.
And if everyone's consensual and everyone's enjoying themselves, then it's okay, right? That's it. That's the whole of the law. You know, that's the beginning and end of it.
Do what thou wilt. You know, that's it, right? As long as it's not causing harm. That's it. That seems to be.
And consent is enthusiastic.
Yeah,
rock and roll, kids,
you know, absolutely. What a story, right?
Yeah, no, it's great stuff.
It's a bit of a high point, that one. I mean, it's again, doesn't come up very often, but it's very, very good and massively influential on me, certainly.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think it's a real firecracker, and it's really I do think, again, I think part of the reason it's probably not spoken about as much as the humor. I think also part of it probably is the tonal dissonance. I think probably for some readers it might be a bit much if you're, you know, because you think you're getting set up for one thing and then you get something else, and tonally it shifts. It shifts quite abruptly as well.
This is not Hellraiser, right? It doesn't have the sort of like the it doesn't have that like weird dark depth of Hellraiser. It's a different thing.
Except maybe for the closing image, actually, which I would suggest actually is really claustrophobic and really unpleasant. In a kind of and I mean those in complimentary terms, of course, because it's horror story. Those were intended as compliments. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right though. Although actually, the other thing it does have in common with Hellraiser is you could fairly apply the tagline "Demons to some, angels to others."
Demons to some, angels to others. Yeah, again, it crops up in a different way, slightly different dynamic here, but very much so. It's very much there.
Yeah,
it's very much there. And once again, the themes and even like the dynamic of this story will find a more fulsome expression in Cabal a little later.
Sure. I mean, I think you could make a case for Hellraiser being the kind of A, darker, and B, more explicitly like BDSM inspired and themed version of this story, right? Like it's a different iteration, but there is a sense of, because there are parallels.
Definitely. I mean, Frank and Eugene have got a little bit in common, obviously, you know.
There you go.
They're very, very similar dynamically. I mean, again, the feminist element of Hellraiser, or the Hellbound Heart, is very clear, very, very clear.
And I think Julia is, you know, a more complicated and proactive kind of version of Lucy.
Of Lucy,
yeah. I mean, if there is one criticism I got of the story, actually, I will say it is Lucy's passivity does bother me. It's the one element of it that I just wish
she's not an
had.
Active agent.
No,
exactly. Like anything. I mean, like she literally, when Eugene is abusing their child, she literally just retreats to a shack, you know, outside of the house, you know.
It sucks, and I think, and it's interesting because again I think about, like, again, as I said earlier, like that these are themes and concerns that King is, you know, has worried at through his entire career, right? I mean, I think even you could, there are elements of this, they're not the fully bored, but there are elements of this theme literally in Carrie, his first novel, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure I'd outright call Carrie a feminist novel. I'm not sure it is that, but it's certainly got concerns around that. It's an understanding of like and it'll keep coming back to it. And actually funny, like the parallel I was thinking of with this story and with thinking about Lucy as a character in particular, I kept thinking about Dolores Claiborne, you know.
Yes.
And how, like, I mean, and bear in mind that this was in King's kind of what I think of as King's naturalistic phase. He almost kind of stopped doing supernatural for
like supernatural fiction.
Because you ended up with, like, you had Gerald's Game, didn't you? Gerald's Game and Dolores Claiborne, which were kind of, which
was that around the same era?
Well, yeah. Which one? Sorry.
Misery.
Misery was earlier. Misery was
earlier, right?
Yeah, right. That was. I think that was still his sort of cocaine and beer days. Was Misery? I think. In fact, I think in On Writing he talks about Annie Wilkes as being a symbol for his own addiction.
It's interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was fascinating. But certainly you get Gerald's Game and Dolores Claiborne, and they are back to back because they're mirror model in the same way that Desperation and the Regulators are mirrors. And there's a moment in Gerald's Game where there's in both stories in Dolores Claiborne where there's an eclipse, right?
Yes,
and the two women, and they see each other in the eclipse. There's just this moment, and it's great because that's it. That's the only connection between the two stories, other than the thematic stuff, right?
Brilliant. I love that so much, don't you? I love it so much. It's so clever.
It's so great. But I was thinking about how there are ways in which Dolores Claiborne's position in life is not a million miles away from Lucy's, right?
Yeah, it's very similar, isn't it?
And the differences in how King kind of draws the character. I mean, look, it's a different kind of story, and it's not the kind of story that Barker was trying to tell here. So, and I'm always wary about criticizing something for what it isn't rather than for what it is. I think that can be a bit, there's a bit of a. I'm not sure how legitimate that is as an approach, to be honest. But I do find Lucy's absence of agency. That's the only real criticism of the story. I
totally get that, because she is a very passive agent all the way through, isn't she? And to the male forces, right, within her life, whether it's her abusive husband, whether it's the monsters, whether it's her son, exactly. Whether it's the town itself, like the very force, the manifestation of patriarchy itself. Totally.
And I think it just would have been, and part of the reason, and again, I not want to criticize it for what it's not, but I think it actually would have had the potential to make the story even richer and potentially more complicated and potentially more tragic, depending on what she ended up doing. Right?
Yeah.
I think it misses a trick. That's all. And it's particularly frustrating because there's so many other things that the story does so well about breaking tropes around. Women in horror stories. It does them brilliantly, and it's just that one light. It's like
just give her just like a little thing that she does. Where she's not being told. She's not coerced. She's not sort of imposed upon. Just one thing. Yeah.
And by the way, look, just to be clear about this, it's not even that Lucy's behavior is unrealistic, because actually
it's not unrealistic.
Well, because one of the things that patriarchy does is it does literally shatter women's will. It's kind of what one of the things it's designed to do, in fact.
Yeah.
Right.
And she is a woman who's been in an abusive relationship with her husband for God knows, isolated out in the desert as well, where she's got no age, she's got no help, nothing, no support, not a damn thing. So it's realistic in that regard. It is a realistic portrayal.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's it's not a complaint about verisimilitude at all. It's just a kind of regret.
It would have been it just would have been interesting to see her made a sort of a more fulsome expression of the satire, I suppose, that's throughout the rest of the story, the attack on patriarchy that's part of the rest of the story.
Yeah, and just given the themes of the story as well. To have another potential avenue for liberation, whether or not it's successful, right? Because of course the boy isn't. The boy is killed, so it's a very tragic story in that sense. And you could either heighten the tragedy, or you could have some kind of bittersweet ending where the mother survives and the child is killed. And any of those, but I just think that's the only thing in the story where I feel like there was a bit of space to do something. It feels like a missed trick, but I mean. That doesn't take away. Again, that's criticizing it for what it isn't. It doesn't take away at all from what it is, which is fucking spectacular.
I mean, what I'm thinking is her grappling with Eugene at the end with the gun, and maybe it going off, killing her, and that could have been a thing. That
was, and that's an amazing, right? Like the idea that in this version, Mary saves Jesus by sacrificing herself.
Yeah. Interesting.
I think it's all stuff. But the interesting thing for me is almost any way that scene plays out, if she's in there with agency, it's more interesting. Even if it doesn't change the outcome one bit, actually. Even if it's just her action is thwarted, but even just the fact of her taking, I just think it's
the taking of action, isn't it? That's what it is. It's taking of action, and standing up to Eugene. Actually getting something back. Of herself.
Yeah.
But I mean, on the whole,
if you want to go ultra dark, ultra bleak, have a fucking side with patriarchy. Have a give up, fall back in line, right? And just have that be that soul destroying thing, right?
Oh, that would be really dark, wouldn't it? That would.
Well,
Bloody hell.
But this is the point, right? Any of them are valid, right? Any of those are valid ways you can tell the story and deliver a message and you know, punch your reader in the face one more time on the way out the door.
Bloody hell.
And what are we in this for, if not to punch our reader in the face one more time on our way out the door? That's kind of the definition of being a successful horror writer.
I was going to say, that needs to be on a cover or a blurb somewhere, doesn't it? What are we here for if not to punch the reader in the face a couple of times? But no, I mean, I really enjoyed rereading this one this afternoon. Actually, really, like, loads of sparks going off in my head with this one. It was just fireworks, great fun. I know the next one, the new Murders in the Rue Morgue, that's a more downbeat one, so it's going to be a nice sort of tonal contrast when we get to that.
Gotta say, the title alone really excites me, because I am massive fan of Poe's Dupin stories, because I'm a massive Holmes fan, and obviously Dupin's the kind of of literary antecedent to Sherlock Holmes. So
absolutely, so you're gonna like this one, but this is probably gonna be
all about it, man.
This is like, Barker does Poe.
Barker does Poe, but not just Barker does Poe, like Barker does Dupin, maybe. Like, I might.
He does Dupin, he does. It's I remember this one. It's very well. We'll do it when we do it. Yeah.
But just to say, like, obviously, I got to the last page, flipped over, and saw that was the next story. I was like, oh hell yes!
This is. I remember enjoying this one a lot. I haven't read it for a long time, but I remember enjoying this one a heck of a lot.
Yeah, no, I'm excited.
Kit, before we skedaddle, have you got anything that you'd like to pimp out?
You know what I do? I've got a couple of things I want to talk about. The first one is a new podcast series, and this is, at the time of me telling you this, is a world exclusive. You're the first person to hear about it, but it's going to be all over the internet in the next sort of week, because we're launching. So a new podcast series that I have been working on. And when I say I've been working on, we've got, I think, 10 episodes recorded already. Oh, wow. So, and we've been sitting in the can, and it's called The Ultimate Horror Anthology. So this is a new podcast series with myself and horror author Jasper Bark, published mainly through Crystal Lake at the moment. His new novel series, Draw You In. He's just brought out a trilogy of horror stories. It's fucking insane. Novels, and they're just oh god, he's annoyingly good. Anyway, so the premise of the show is basically that Jasper and I take it in turns to pick a short story that we believe belongs in a theoretical tome entitled The Ultimate Horror Anthology. So that's it.
Very cool.
So it's Jasper and I picking a short story and then picking it apart and explaining why we think it belongs in the Ultimate Horror Anthology, and we're taking it in turns to pick the stories. So season 1's going to be 12 episodes. We've recorded 10. The first one will be going live on Tuesday. I can't do the maths. 21st, I think. We'll be going live on Tuesday, the 21st. Obviously, George will send you the links to Podbean and stuff.
Yes, absolutely.
I'll first have to build them this weekend. That's a real talk, but it's there anyway. So, but yeah, so that I want to plug that, because I think if you enjoyed this kind of conversation, Jasper's like George, an incredibly knowledgeable, erudite chap, and it's I love the format, because it's really like this series. It's really celebratory. We're just, because we're talking about what we consider to be the best of the best of the best. So every episode is really a celebration of the story that we're talking about and why we think it belongs in the Ultimate Horror Anthology. And of the of the 10 episodes, I think we agree on 9 of the stories. There's one of Jasper's picks I'm a little skeptical about, but that also makes for a great episode.
Interesting.
Yeah. But that's part of the fun, right? That's part of the enjoyment. We knew going in that might happen. And certainly Jasper's been honest with me about how, like, a couple of my picks raised eyebrows for him, and so he went back and he was like, oh no, okay. So that's quite good. But also the other nice thing about that show is that you will hear about stories you're expecting to hear. Yes, we of course cover The Raft. Of course, we cover In the Hills, the Cities, as you expect. Of
course, yes.
But you will also hear coverage of stories, I promise you, like most of the people listening to this will never have heard of before, and they are absolute masterpieces. For example, actually the first episode, which will be going live on Tuesday, covers a short story by Brian Lumley, who's most famous for the Necroscope series.
Necroscope books, yeah.
I didn't even know he wrote short stories, but he did. And this is a short story that he wrote in the early 70s when he was still working as a military fucking policeman, if you can imagine that. And the story is called The Viaduct, and I had never heard of this. It was Jasper's pick, and he wanted it to be the first episode. And I had no clue about it, and I have to tell you, folks, genuinely, it's one of the scariest. It's one of the scariest fucking short horror stories I've read in my entire goddamn life, and I'd never heard of it.
I'm gonna have to seek that out because I do like Brian Lumley. I've got to admit.
Okay. I mean, without spoilers, right? The thing about The Viaduct is you get to about page 10, and you understand what the premise of the story is going to be, and just the bottom falls out of your world. It's fucking perfect.
Wow!
It's amazing, and it's non-supernatural.
Interesting. Very interesting. Actually, Brian Lumley is not supernatural.
Yeah, no, right, because Necroscope, the guy had this incredible supernatural imagination.
It's Lovecraftian, right? I mean, you know.
Yeah. No, The Viaduct is like, well, I don't want to say anything else because I don't want to spoil it, but it's just, it's genuinely a perfect short horror story. And there's a few of those on the way through. I mean, Jasper's, frankly, he's more well-read than me, so he knew more of the stories than I did, and plenty of his picks I'd never heard of, and many of them are just extraordinary. Also, we do, of course, cover one of the stories from Laura Marrow's collection, which Laura's been a previous guest of the show, and we cover Cat World as well from House of Wounds. Justina Bruce's extraordinary. So yeah, I do want to plug that because that's really cool. And the other thing I want to mention briefly, it's not out yet, but look out for something called Millionaires Day, which is coming soon. It's the fictionalized version of the true history of what happened in the United Kingdom on winter solstice 2019. You have been lied to, my friends. You have been lied to and lied to and lied to by the government, by the internet, to the point where most of you don't even know that this actually happened. But I'm telling you, it did, and luckily I've got the goods for you. So look out for it. Millionaires Day coming soon.
Excellent stuff. Excellent stuff. As for me, guys, same as usual. Becoming Knocking About here on Exaggerated Elegy. And also on Our Lives in Horror. There's been a couple new episodes coming up on there very, very soon. Links to all of my short story publications on strangeplaygrounds.com, or just go to Amazon. Same for Kit, by the way. Go to Amazon, type in Kit Power, type in George Daniel Lee, find our Amazon author pages and links to all of our published work there. Once again, go to Arrow Films and look at the Quartet of Torment UHD and Blu-ray sets, because
you need it in your life. You know you need it in your life.
You do. Kit and I feature on the Hellbound disc, and the featurette Hell is What They Wanted, and we're very, 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 very proud of that indeed. I think. Oh, also, Our Lives, My Life in Horror. The series, that's still ongoing. I've got a new article out recently on. It's ostensibly about Raymond E. Feist's novel Fairy Tale, but it's not really about that. It's not really about that. It's about like nostalgia and the way like images and influences kind of impact your developing imagination and stuff like that. It's just that it uses Fairy Tale as the personal example of that, you know.
I actually I just want to say briefly, because I read that in the last couple of days. You have to go and check that out, guys, because I got to tell you, it's when I read that, I was like, that's the kind of thing that I wish I'd done more often in my life in horror. It's so good. It's so good. So yeah, go check that out.
Thanks so much. And there's a couple others coming up very soon, actually. My Life in Horrors, because I write them in batches. It seems, I get like I get the bit between my teeth and I write them in batches. So there's a couple more coming up very, very soon on various different subjects. One of them on video games, actually. So that's going to be fun. Because I love my video games. I love my video games. And I think that's it. Kit, thank you once again. These chats are always great fun. They're always great fun.
No, absolutely. This show is coming back to the well for me. When I need to go, when I need to pick me up, I need a lift and refreshing.
Honestly, it is.
It's great.
Yeah, stuff. And as we said at the top, it's been a bit of a difficult few months to be honest. So this has been great. It's been really, really nice. I mean, I know Kaylee got in touch recently. She's gonna try and get Barker.
Oh, go for it, man. That would be so amazing.
She did say if she got in touch and said, if I get him, if I manage it, do you want to come on? I was like, nah.
it's like, Kaylee, try and stop him, man. What are you talking about?
Although, bloody hell, Jesus, can you?
No, you'd be fine. You'd be fine.
Oof. intimidating, right? But amazing. I mean, obviously
Oh,
wouldn't
you'd be
turn that up. Bloody hell.
Yeah.
My
You'll be fine.
goodness.
Adrenaline will get you through. You'll
Yeah.
throw up afterwards. You'll
I
be
will.
fine.
Yeah, I
You'll be
absolutely will
fine.
throw up after. I will throw up after. There's no doubt in my mind. But yeah, so watch this space, guys. Who knows? Who knows, right? Until next time, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.